Okay.
We got a long night in front of us.
Okay, it is now recording.
And do I officially, Patrick, do I officially open the meeting or anything? I'm trying to
Yeah, you
remember.
open the meeting and have Susan call the roll, and then Chair, I just have a couple of opening statements.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. This is the Monday night, second budget committee for the fiscal 21-22. Welcome, Susan. If you would please start with the roll.
Yes. Councillor Fagan.
Here.
Councillor Hassan.
Here.
Councillor Mitchell.
Here.
Councillor Sansusi.
Here.
Councillor Tivnon.
Here.
Member Burton. Member Duggar.
Here.
Member Galendez.
Here.
Member Huang.
Here.
Member Kamath.
Here.
Member Molinado.
Here.
Member Zatzmary. And Mayor Beatty.
Here.
Thank you, Susan. We'll turn it over to Mr. O'Clair. I believe you had some opening remarks.
Yes, I just wanted to share one thing with the Budget Committee. We have the amendment packet number 1 that we reviewed on Monday. And I did want to let you know that I did add one item to the amendment. I'm going to share it on the screen here. We talked about a little bit on Monday about that new Fund 102 called the Federal American Rescue Plan Act Fund. And when we had prepared the budget, the amount that we were expected to be received was about $17.5 million. Again, it's going to be received half this fiscal year and half next fiscal year. And that has been reduced for each fiscal year down to a total of $16.8 million. So it's about a $326,000 reduction. And so this will be an amendment to actually show the reduction in next year's budget of $326,832, and that will reduce the contingency. But also there's a note that I put in there that when we prepared the final budget document after the budget has been approved by the Budget Committee and forwarded to the City Council for adoption, the adopted budget will also show a reduction of the same amount, $326,832, in this year's estimate. So the total reduction will be the total of 600 and almost a little over $650,000 between the 2 years. And then, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that everybody received responses to questions that had been received through about 4:30 this afternoon. We had questions from members Hassan, Sansusi, and Kenneth, and I sent those responses out along with a couple of worksheets with regards to some of the information that was requested. So if anybody has any questions on those, I'd be happy to answer any questions we have on those. I'll go ahead and stop my screen share.
I'd like to note that member Zatzmary has now joined us.
Thank you. With that,
If
Chair,
anyone, no, I was going to say if anyone has questions, again, just like the other night, put your name in the box and I'll recognize you.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to interrupt real quick. Susan, can you send member Burton another email with the link?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. Any other questions for Mr. O'Clair before we move forward? Seeing none. Looks like we're ready for presentations.
Mr. Chair, we just had one item on the budget before that.
Okay.
If there's any general public that's in the audience to speak, although it's not the formal public hearing that we'll have on Thursday when we talk about state shared revenues and also the budget in general, we give anybody who's tuned in the opportunity to speak before the meeting formally gets started.
Thank you for the reminder. Susan, or I guess I should say, do we have any members of the public that would like to comment? I believe is a 3-minute limit. Is that correct, Mr. O'Clair?
That is correct.
We will recognize anyone if you can let me know. We'll give them that second.
Yeah, for those attendees, please use the raise hand feature if you would like to address the budget committee.
And Mr. Chair and Susan, just scanning all of the 45 participants, I don't recognize anybody who's not a member of the committee or the member of city staff, so I don't think we have any public individuals engaged in the meeting.
Very well. Then if I have it correct, then I think we're ready for presentations now, maybe. Is that correct? Looks like
Yes.
HR. Perfect.
Yes, we're proceeding with the HR budget, and just for reference, we're on about page 631 of your budget document.
Thank you.
So Patricia, you are up.
Good evening, Budget Chair Duggar, Mayor Beatty, Council President Mitchell, City Councilors, Community Budget Committee members, and City Manager Kurt Wilson. Tonight you will hear from the Human Resources team as we present goals achieved, goals not achieved, goals planned for as it relates to our budget. Our budget is on 2 pages, pages 631, and then on 658, we share the insurance budget with the City Attorney's Office. The team here, Nancy Beekler, who is our HR analyst, Matthew Haldeman, who is our Organizational Development Manager, Alfonso Moore, our Employee and Labor Relations Manager, and Bob Cochran, our Classification and Compensation Analyst. These 4 will be leading us through very short pages of a PowerPoint presentation as we talk at a high level about our budget. If you have questions, feel free to answer them. At the end of the HR presentation, I'll be talking to you a little bit about our needs as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And then we will end our presentation. For the record, I'm not feeling very well tonight, and I hope you can hear me well. If you can't hear me well, or if you can't hear my words well, please feel free to ask me to repeat what I've said or to clarify. So I'm going to hand over now to the HR team who will be leading us through tonight.
Okay, good evening. This is Nancy Beekler, your Senior HR Analyst. This is the Human Resources Department, and our vision statement is to anticipate, support, and adapt to the changing needs of the city by building and maintaining caring relationships with past, future, and current staff. This is our Human Resources team, a diverse group of individuals with a singular goal of service. Alfonso Moore, Matthew Halderman, Atira Kim, Bob Crocker, Dana Orth, Nancy Bowden-Rokas, myself, Nancy Beekler, Gregory Garabedian, Kathleen Bin, and Patricia Anderson-Wick. Achievements for fiscal year 2020-2021. Employee and labor relations. The team has strengthened Labor Management Committee, LMC, meetings by improving communication and relationships between labor and management. New LMCs have started in the Public Works Engineering Division and Finances Court Division. The Library LMC has continued through the COVID outbreak as well. We will continue to facilitate the meetings and foster communication and cooperation between the groups. The COVID outbreak led to changes in how we administered the Employee Appreciation Luncheon. We received feedback from city staff that they appreciated the various timeframes in which to participate, along with the different food groups, food choices, such as American, Asian, and Mexican food choices, versus the one-day, one-time approach pre-COVID in-person lunches. All staff and supervisor meetings continued through the COVID pandemic. There appeared to be an increase in employee participation as a result of virtual meetings. We had over 6 all-city or supervisor meetings during this last year. For the 2020 and 2021 to date years, there have been no outstanding union grievances from either the Service Employees International Union Local 503 SEIU or the Beaverton Police Association BPA. The downward grievance trend is due to our relationship building with union leadership. We are currently negotiating the collective bargaining agreement between the city and SEIU, effective July of 2021. In addition, we have worked to enhance and broaden the knowledge base of supervisors regarding labor relations, ensuring sound labor relations practices to help prevent workplace disruptions for employees. Due to the impact of COVID-19 within employees' personal and professional lives, we started a cultural shift strategy of reviewing employee concerns, issues, and problems with a lens of conflict resolution. As a result, in 2020, we successfully applied the cultural shift lens to 40 employee relations issues, resulting in employee retention. We have currently applied the cultural shift lens to 12 issues in 2021, which is currently trending 20% below last year's numbers. Organizational development and our street-to-seat talent acquisition strategy. The team has really gotten down to business with viewing talent acquisition through an equity lens. This has led to changes in our approach to making employment with the city more accessible to marginalized communities. Some examples include creating job postings with more culturally inclusive language and minimum qualifications that consider life experience, piloting the masking of personal identifying information during application review, and by instituting annual bias awareness training for every interview panelist. Each of these on their own are positive steps, but together they make up an important part of our strategy to reduce bias in our talent acquisition process. Under the virtual operations due to the pandemic and lower hiring during the lockdown in calendar year 2020, we did struggle to make inroads within all of our diversity categories for hiring, but we did increase hires as a percentage year over year from calendar year 2019 in Asian or Pacific Islander, Native American, and those identifying as 2 or more races, while the percentage of whites hired declined. The talent acquisition team continues to look for new avenues to reach potential candidates of color. We are members of Partners in Diversity and attend Say Hey events at every opportunity, and we began posting every job opening to the Urban League of Portland starting in December of last year. Human Resources ran our first Spanish language radio ad on KRYP 93.1 LRA for our job fair back in April, and we continue to analyze the diversity of applicant pools and extend job posting deadlines when pools lack representation from communities of color as compared to Washington County Census data. As a result, workforce diversity continues to increase as 17.6% of our employees identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, BIPOC, up from 16.8% last year. We have 37 employees in various SEIU, BPA, and management assignments and departments currently receiving bilingual pay. Veteran hires increased from 9.8% to 12.8%. Additionally, our leadership positions continue to mirror our diverse workforce, with 17.1% identifying as BIPOC and 45.7% non-male. Turnover as a whole decreased to 7.9%, down from 9.6% last year. But potentially reflecting what we hear in the news, the non-male members of our workforce did drop by 1% to 41.7%, as 46.8% of overall turnover and 40% of retirees were non-male. Our average time to hire for the last year is 58 days, which is down 8% from this time last year, and is taking 48 days less than peer organizations' average. Pivoting to the start of the pandemic, the organizational development team provided virtual learning and development opportunities for staff through the CIS Learning Center. Since March of 2020, employees have completed an astounding 4,000 courses in the city's learning management system. We have also implemented a virtual version of new employee orientation and maintained live leadership and professional development workshops offered through COBU, our City of Beaverton University. Finally, and despite all of the changes to how, when, and where we work, our 2020 employee engagement survey saw a modest increase in our employee engagement score and a drop in percentage of disengaged employees. Our organization is healthy and engaged, but there is still more work to be done. As you can see on this slide, questions 6, 11, and 12 of the 2020 survey highlighted feedback and employee development as areas of opportunity for us. As a result of the survey, we have introduced peak performance conversations between employees and their supervisors. Peak performance conversations are designed to bolster employee engagement through goal setting, professional development planning, and regular progress check-ins. We look forward to seeing the impact of peak performance conversations on this year's engagement survey and reporting back. System improvements, data analysis, and reporting. Improvements this year include implementing an HR department work order system to streamline communications while meeting employee needs, documenting procedures such as records archiving, and continued upgrades to the payroll HR system Highline. Employee compensation, insurance, and wellness benefits. The team has been reevaluating the city's compensation policy to develop a class comp philosophy and pay plan, having reviewed 150 classifications representing approximately 90% for consistency with internal policy, collective bargaining agreements, and Oregon's pay equity law, and developing job descriptions separate from classification specifications. However, of the 615 possibles, we've only completed 10%. Internal pay equity audit practices have been set up with 100% of salary placements being done through an equity and compliance lens. Under insurance and wellness benefits, we held fitness and yoga classes via Zoom and mailed open enrollment postcards home to employees to hurdle obstacles during remote work. We initiated ergonomic incentives to those affected by working from home during COVID, receiving 72 requests so far. Reached out in real time to the employees affected by September's wildfires, developed COVID leave plans and procedures, possible exposure notifications, and partnered with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue on vaccination clinics. Our goals for 2021-2022. Employee and labor relations. The team will continue to facilitate labor management committee meetings to strengthen communication between labor and management. We will work with the employee feedback received from the employee appreciation lunches to better improve and increase participation. Virtual all staff and supervisor meetings will carry on. Our goal is to continue the downward trend of union grievances from either SEIU or BPA, but continuing to nurture our relationships with union leadership. We will be negotiating the collective bargaining agreement between the city and the Beaverton Police Association, BPA, effective July of 2022. And we will continue our work to enhance the knowledge base of supervisors regarding employee and labor relations to effectively deal with workplace conflict. Organizational development and talent acquisition. As part of our continued building of strategy using an equity lens, the team will be reviewing and revising policies which may be barriers to structural equity in employment and advancement. We will be striving to meet people where they are through participation in community events such as Beaverton Night Market or the Beaverton Farmers Market, to showcase opportunities, developing online resources for job seekers with practice interview questions and application tips, and by ensuring all departments have current succession and replacement plans in place. Similarly, for organizational development, meeting employees where they are is the theme for 2021. To ensure employees receive equitable access to development opportunities, we will be offering in-person and virtual workshops along with self-directed, self-paced online courses. System improvements, covering the HR office in a hybrid model of remote work and on-site, has presented a need to create individual desk procedure manuals to streamline the ability to meet customer needs without always deferring. With a longer-term focus, we will be working with other stakeholders to discuss the number of separate and separated systems used by candidates, employees, human resources, and payroll seeking efficiencies. Employee compensation, insurance, and wellness benefits. We will be presenting the compensation philosophy and pay plan to City Council via the City Manager and City Leadership approval processes for additional input, creating a final plan that is transparent, defensible, and communicated to employees and job seekers. Once adopted, we intend on providing training and orientation on the compensation plan, job descriptions, and pay equity to at least 90% of managers and supervisors within the next fiscal year. We also intend on researching salary placements analysis tools, continue creating job descriptions, and establish relevant salary schedules to align with current salary ranges and job classifications. Under insurance and wellness benefits, we will be researching HSAs and high deductible medical insurance options, exploring additional resources for mental health services, and initiating a request for information for additional wellness products to offer employees. In fiscal year 21-22, we're ready to run. Does anyone have any questions regarding this part of our presentation?
Nancy, I have one real quick. I was waiting to see if others, do we know I was looking over the notes, do we know the percentage of women in management? I think that would be really good to report to the community.
I had that in my notes.
And maybe you said it and I missed it. I don't recall hearing it.
I'm having to back up here. I did talk about our leadership.
I heard it by race, but I didn't hear.
Yes. And 45.7% non-male.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Recognize Councillor Hassan.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I had a couple quick questions. I'll start with the first one. This is less related to budget, more general. Does the city or does HR have sort of a general diversity statement that's sort of part of our, and I know I've asked this before, but I just want to get a sense of where that is today.
Does Matthew or
Councillor Hassan, would you repeat that question?
Yeah, just like a general diversity, like a statement around diversity that sort of expresses where we stand. Is that something that exists? Or I think the last time I asked, it was something that we were working on, and I just didn't know what the update was on that.
So the city is currently rolling out an equity statement related to how we conduct business. It's related to ensuring that we break down barriers and that we actually eliminate any institutional racism or any barriers that exist within the community and within employment. In HR, we have a diversity position in terms of our policy position of how we retain, how we actually acquire talent, and how we retain employees. So we have actually written those into our job postings, and they're there for all to see. We encourage women and Black, Indigenous, and people of color to apply. And we actually encourage veterans to apply. And we have a written statement that says if we receive a pool of applicants which eliminate or do not include a particular percentage, depending on what we're recruiting for and what Washington County statistics look like, we will actually go out and replace the ad.
And that equity statement, you said it's being worked on. When do you foresee that coming out?
That has been through the city manager's office, and Jennifer Johnson, who is our DEI program manager, is currently meeting with teams to ensure that they understand the equity statement. The internal equity team has been working on this equity statement. This is their, they championed this statement and worked with department heads to ensure it was rolled out. So it is actually being rolled out, but we're taking it from an educational perspective first before we put it on a city page. Because if employees can't understand it and live it, then it will just be words on paper. So I would expect, and I don't know if Jennifer is here, I didn't invite her to be here this evening, but based on the schedule, based on the schedule that I have in my head, she should actually be doing, well, this is already the end of May, but I would say expect to see an equity statement by mid-June.
Okay.
And I can actually share that statement tonight. In fact, I planned to read that statement tonight.
Okay, thank you. Another more comment on page 635. I really appreciated the table that really helped us understand kind of the number and percentage of eligible candidates. And again, this is more a general statement. I just want to address it. If we acknowledge, that there are structural racism does exist, we have to start thinking about what it means to be eligible for a role. And so when we look at these numbers and we look at the eligible column, we see obviously certain populations are more eligible than others. And so just generally speaking, thinking about like, what does workforce development look like? What do other barriers for people to get into management look like? Because we won't be able to change these numbers just on eligibility. So as we're just forward thinking in human resources, I'd love for us to be thinking about general workforce development opportunities so that everyone is more eligible versus less eligible because of the access to economic resources or whatever they might have. I love the work that y'all are doing in recruitment to really help us recruit populations that represent our community. I also want to make sure that we're doing work to retain as well. And I think you talked about that a little bit in the packet, but just kind of bringing that to attention, because I think sometimes organizations get really focused on recruitment and then forget the retention, which is you can bring them all over, but if you don't create an environment that makes them want to stay and make them happy and make them feel included, that's really important as well. So those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan. Councillor Sansusi, you are up.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll say it's interesting that Councillor Hassan has called attention to that table, because I recall calling attention to the same table last year. This is not a comment about HR and the way HR is doing its work. This is more of a comment about something else that's going on and that bears careful attention from the city, which is that if you look at the table, 1 of 9 referred Black candidates was offered a job, which is the lowest percentage of anyone in this table. And last year, that number was 1 of 31. So there's something going wrong in the hiring process here, probably, possibly, maybe, that is causing Black applicants who are passing all the qualifications and being referred for positions to not be given offers. So, with a universe of 40, it's hard to say what exactly is going on, but I think it's one of those things that the city as a whole is going to have to start exploring in a little bit more detail as the next year goes by, because I'd hate to see us have that same statistic show up again next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sansucci. Nancy, are there any other questions before we move forward? Okay, seeing none, back to HR. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'd like to pass the virtual baton back to Patricia.
Thank you, Nancy. So now we're going to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and what the city is doing and plans to do. This year, we had a city-initiated audit because we didn't really know where we were when the whole country had to question its position after the death of George Floyd in May of 2020. There was a leadership commitment to ensuring that we partnered with the IET and that we looked at ourselves in terms of who we are as a city regarding race, what do we need to do as a city, and how do we ensure that we have equity. We have always explored equity in terms of pay equity, in terms of access to jobs, access to opportunities within the city. But the internal equity team, which is made up of employees in the city who do quite a bit of equity work and should be applauded for their work, they actually encouraged us. In fact, they pushed us to think about a citywide equity statement. They challenged us to think differently, and our partnership with them was extremely advantageous. During the months of January to now, we have been celebrating diversity in different forms. We celebrated women, we have celebrated people with disabilities. We have drawn awareness to different festivals and traditional celebrations and religious celebrations. And that is encouraging us to include everyone at the city in being important. We also have formal DEI training and coaching. After we did our audit in the summer of 2020, we realized that our hearts were larger than our knowledge base. And so we realized that we needed training. At the department head level, we took the baton and said, we need help. And so we got together and we designed a set of plans that include how we move forward. The IET has also been asking us for affinity groups called employee resource groups. Employee resource groups traditionally are known to ensure that, well, to contribute to engagement and retention. It is said that when you join any community, any household, if you see yourself reflected in the population, you are more likely to feel that you belong. And so employee resource groups have been proposed to us by the IET, and we need to get these started in the next fiscal year. Let's look at what happened in our audit. In our audit, we had, can Matthew advance a slide for me?
I'm trying to. There, sorry.
Okay. So in our audit, we had some long-term recommendations in terms of how we can actually start to chip away at institutional racism and achieve some sort of racial equity as a start. But it was important that this work was deliberate. The study that was done by SciComm said we need to develop an anti-racism plan and embed it and DEI into everyday policies, procedures, and practices. It means that everything we do as a city internally and externally should be viewed from an equity lens. The study also said that we should commit to an increased transparency and a shared accountability. And we should be monitoring equity at all levels using SMART goals and outcomes. And therefore, equity does not just belong to leadership. Leadership needs to champion it. Leadership needs to aggressively pursue it and ensure that it exists. But it's important that every single employee understands what equity means, can explain it in the community, and can live it as we pursue our work. Department heads and managers need to fully commit to ongoing personal and organizational growth and development, including policy and practice changes. All of these were recommended and all of these have begun. You know from many council meetings and budget meetings that there is quite a bit of work being done by CDD, the library, public works on the public facing side. HR exists to ensure that the appropriate staffing levels, training, policies, and processes are there to partner with their work to ensure that equity can continue. So what is equity? And this is where I'm going to read the statement that the internal equity team led. They spent time really working on this, and it has been fine-tuned and it's being explored. It's actually being communicated to employees at this time. The City of Beaverton is committed to supporting a culture of accountability, equity, and inclusion for all, especially for marginalized groups. We pledge to continue the ongoing, difficult, and essential work needed to address institutional racism and historical inequities in all forms. So when we think of it, equity is at the center. But we are stretched as a body of employees, and we really need a collaborated, central way to get this work done. So who should lead this work? And this is where we have a recommendation for the Budget Committee and for Council. We recommend the hiring of a Chief Equity Officer and a Program Manager and a Support Specialist. The City Chief Equity Officer we're recommending would report to the City Manager to specifically focus on providing strategies, planning, facilitation, and development of the city's work on equity and engagement for the present and long term. This person will work in coordination with city departments and promote and measure equity and inclusion within city operations and advance citywide equity initiatives with the goal of eliminating disparities. I want to speak to the table that I knew that Councillor Sansusi was going to notice in our presentation, and we kept it in because we want to report on both the good things that we're doing and the things that we need to do better. And so I am addressing Council and the Budget Committee at this time. When the pandemic hit, HR had several plans. We wanted to go out into the community. We had appointments to go into the schools because we wanted people to start dreaming of what they could be doing. We wanted to put a crown over every person in the community and watch them grow into it. We've talked in our team about second chances because we know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more likely to have criminal records which are not removed, or actually have criminal records which in the beginning they couldn't afford to have adjudicated differently. So our plans during COVID changed, and we pretty much could not get out into the community to actually start talking with folks. Because yes, why aren't Black people coming to Beaverton as a city for employment? And why aren't they staying in Beaverton as a city of residence? So that is something that we need to be addressing. And we take no pride in that table, but we need help. The Chief Equity Officer would be helping us because we cannot do this thing in a silo. We have to look at the city programs and we have to look at city staff. We have a program manager who is she's unknown from the library, Jennifer Johnson. And this is a position that the department heads decided we needed. And we created an opportunity for a current employee to help us lead diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Jennifer has been doing a fantastic job working with the IET, the department head team, and with HR to actually advance the work of equity, inclusion, and justice in our city. Because we want to make sure that underreached populations, underserved employees, people who have no voices because of what they think of themselves can enter into brave spaces and find their voices, but we need help. If we create an Office of Equity, we're also going to need administrative support. And so we believe that a support specialist is critical to helping this person get their work done. So we're hoping that in the next fiscal year, and as soon as possible, that the city manager will be able to hire a chief equity officer who will then be able to appropriately design that office and staff needed. We need to do this work, but we don't have the resources that we need to get it done and to get it done right. And that's the end of my plea. And do you have any questions for me?
Any questions? Oh,
yeah, sorry, I have a quick question. If this chief equity officer came and they reported into the city manager, are they over HR? Like, what does the org in theory look like to you?
In theory, to me, that is pretty much the work of the city manager. The recommendation of the department heads and IET, because we simultaneously made the recommendation, is that this person would be at the level of a department head. This person needs to have the responsibility and the commensurate authority to get the work done. So we see this as a department head. Human resources, I know that several people are confused with the work of human resources and the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Human resources has to always keep equity, inclusion, belonging, and engagement at the forefront of the work it does. But human resources also needs help on the external side, because the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice in the city is more than just city employment. It is city practices, policies, government, programs, services. And so we believe that it is larger than the internal focus that we currently have.
thank you, Pat. Recognize Member Gallo.
Thank you. Two questions. Hi, Pat. Good to see you. Thank you. Always a pleasure. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. You sound great, so sorry. But are these proposed heads in the budgets? I'm having question number one. Are they in the budget? I'm having a hard time seeing where they are.
No, they are not.
Okay.
I am asking that we consider that they be added.
Oh, okay.
Not as an amendment, but as a decision that the city manager will be making at the earliest convenience. So this is my tease.
Okay, boy, this one I'm gonna have to chew on and struggle with a little bit, and we'll get to it at some point, because as you know, I spent 3.5 years of my life in HR in the 80s when the whole Title VII there's a lot of emphasis on Title VII, a lot, and it's coming back. But question for you, and I'm trying to understand if this is your final answer, or if there are ways we could change and shape the numbers a little bit, because I agree it's important. I agree with the comment that Councillor Sansucci said about the numbers may feel a little, spidey sense. There's a little awkward. But the fact of the matter is that, the organization that I ran in HR was an organization of 3,200 people. And of the 3,200 people, there were really 18 or 20 hiring managers. That's it. The rest were not hiring. So, and so when challenged by our senior leadership in the US, this was in Puerto Rico, because we said the same thing. You need a bunch of people to do equity, Title VII and equity and stuff like that. The pushback was, do you really need 3 heads when in reality you're trying to affect the hiring decisions of 20 people? So I don't know what that number is, but I'm hoping that we can have some further dialogue on, again, how many managers and supervisors do we need to better train or better influence or better coach or better support to make the right decisions for hiring? It's doesn't seem like it's a large enough number that we need 3 heads. So I agree with you. I think we need to do something. I'm not sure that throwing 3 bodies at it is the right solution versus trying to come up with ways to influence the hiring manager. He or she, that's the one we've got to go find and better equip, I think, to make the right hiring decisions. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Should
Ms.
I
Gallo.
comment?
Oh, yep, please.
So the Chief Equity Officer and the Office of Equity is not just about hiring. I can tell you that our managers are really interested in learning. We have to do self-audits. And I can tell you, you have a team of supervisors and managers in this city who are interested in change, who are interested in doing the right work and the heavy lifting. And I have to stand here right now today and be an advocate for them and to tell you that they are carrying more than their fair share of the loads. We as a city have asked our employees to carry so much, and they do not complain, and they work long hours. This work that we're asking for is a work that is going to be expanded out to the community, to our residents. For example, when we talk about Cooper Mountain, when we talk about a fountain in the park, when we talk about road works and expansion of roads, these are the things that we have to look at. And how do those policies and how do our contracting services and how we manage our employee numbers and ensure that we have a ready labor force, how do we do that together? And so we're asking for someone to help us with this work. It's not that we can't do it, it's that we are just carrying so much that it is not being done as well as we would like it. And if we want excellence, we've got to approach it from a budget perspective as well. So DEI without a budget will be DEI that fails. And so I'm here as an advocate to say that our managers, our department heads, our supervisors, our team leaders are really doing phenomenal work and they're ready to learn, but we need help.
Thank you. Recognize member Kenneth.
Hi, Pat. I just have a quick question. So if we add other staff to this diversity, equity, and inclusion group, do we have any targets that you're planning to set so that they can meet it to make sure that this hiring has made some tangible results?
We actually have targets. We have actually laid out some plans and targets that are there, including targets in terms of how we manage our contracts, targets in how we manage development. I can tell you CDD right now is doing some tremendous work to ensure that we're doing everything from an equity and inclusion and justice lens. But yes, we do have targets. Part of also setting targets is that if you don't feel or you can't see the end goal, it impacts how you think and dream and therefore how you're able to plan. Right now, I believe that the tired souls that we have in our city are not as able to plan and be creative as we would, and yet we have targets. But if we look at our sister cities and our sister counties, we're behind as a city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Beatty, you're up.
Thank you. I'm trying to look at this is not in your recommended budget and it's not in the cuts that the city manager recommended. So is this just a cold pitch to the budget committee?
It is a cold pitch. Let's call it a warmer pitch. to the budget committee because I was advised to take this perspective, to ask for you to consider this. So when the city manager comes, the city manager will be able to make that determination. But staff would have already set the groundwork for the request.
Well, I'd like to be clear that this is a position that I do support. I just pitching it to the budget committee rather than the city council seems a little bit, puts us in an awkward position, and it's going to allow a lot of voices into a decision that really shouldn't be here. So I don't know, Mr. Wilson and Patricia, I feel uncomfortable with the way this is coming to us, not because I don't support it. I thought it was in the budget. We told both city manager candidates it was in the budget and it was coming. So I feel a little caught off guard with this tonight.
Councillor Hassan, you're up.
I support this position and I hear the need for this. I want to be thoughtful and intentional about this being an equivalent to a department head, because it goes back to the labor of a person having to do it. And so if you want to bring, and this is an initial, this is me just reacting to this because this is the first time I'm hearing about it. We have a ton to do in our equity work as a city, as a state, as a country, as people, individually as well. And it's really important that we invest that. But to bring bodies that don't have the decision-making power or autonomy to actually make change or influence change can also be problematic. And so while I can't speak on this specifically, the reason I asked the organizational question is if you have a department head, not that we do, but if you did, that was part of the problem or was a challenge and you can't influence or change that person because they're your equivalent, it also becomes problematic. And so really building in this position or the work that needs to happen in a way that they have the autonomy. I have seen chief equity positions be created with really little or no oversight or ability to make change. And so as we discuss this and address this, I want to say first and foremost, I support the need for this kind of work, whether it's in a position, whatever that looks like. If it is in a position, we have to be very intentional as to how it actually influences change, because to just have it and have it be equivalent and not be able to authoritatively say you have a problem with your interviewing process, there's an issue with bias here, there's something going on here that we need to dig into, it doesn't accomplish what we actually need happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. O'Clair, you're up next.
Yes, Chair, and I would like to address the issue of this position. It was in the city manager's message as Exhibit 2. That's where we had a list of new positions that were thought of or requested during the budget process. And the first two under the city administration department was, it has a slightly different title. Back then it was determined it was going to be an internal equity officer. And then right below that was the program project specialist, which would be kind of the program manager. So it was a thought in developing the budget coming forward, but with the general funds revenues and our change to a city charter, to a city manager, interim city manager, hiring a new city manager, we thought it would be best to not put it in the budget, but to have it come to the council sometime during the budget year for consideration. And I think that what Patricia was intending to do tonight was kind of plant the seed that, yes, we're thinking about this, we need to do something, and that will be coming to the city council sometime during the budget year. After the city manager is on board and the city manager can figure out how to bring this to the organization. Where should it fit in the organization? How should it be staffed as far as a level?
Thank you, Mr. O'Clair. Councillor Sansusi.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly concur with the mayor and with Mr. O'Clair that this is a decision that has to be made when we have the long-term city manager on board, because the hiring of somebody at this level must be done by the city manager in conjunction with the city council.
Thank you, Councillor. Manager Wilson.
Sure, just to follow up a little bit on what Mr. Auclair said, part of the issue with putting it in at this stage is to figure out the level. So while Patricia mentioned a recommendation that came from a particular group, that's not the same as coming from the manager. And it's something that really the incoming manager will have to sort of wrestle with, because there are a number of options. So it could very well end up being a recommendation of a department head, but that's not the only option. And if you were to move forward now and to put a specific dollar amount to go along with it, it's going to foreclose on those opportunities for the incoming manager to really determine the best way to incorporate this. But I think there are a number of options to go along with it.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Councillor Mitchell, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. That's what I was going to ask, Kurt, is this kind of like a placeholder for, I think this is the right venue to have this conversation. I really like to hear what our, budget members have to say, just because it's a different perspective and it's so much more rooted to the ground. We're in this conversation and these types of conversations often. So I appreciate bringing it up now, but I'm wondering, is that a placeholder for the future? Could it be, or what was the intention, just to kind of talk about it?
Well, I won't speak to the intention, but with respect to sequencing, if the plan is to allow the incoming manager to be able to sort of make that determination, although that process seems very close, that person's not quite here just yet and hasn't been able to weigh in. So my recommendation would be to defer any action until that time, but I would defer to Patricia with respect to the intent for this evening.
And that is the intent for this evening, Councillor Mitchell, to at least bring this to your attention. And just so you know, council members and budget committee members, Mayor Beatty, the department head salary range is, there is not one salary range for a department head. So the executive salary range is above the division managers. So the recommendation is not to make it a particular salary range. The recommendation is to make it a salary range commensurate with executive responsibilities.
So then I have one more question here. So Mr. Auclair, if we don't approve it tonight, which I don't think that was the intention, then we would come back in supplemental for that, or when do we see those dollars, or if the city manager wanted to choose that role?
My recommendation is that when the organization is ready for this to come forward, that it bring it forward as a discussion point with the city council, because city council after the budget's approved, any changes to FTEs need to be enacted by the city council. Plus, this is a new classification, so the city council has to approve the classification or the job description and its placement on the city salary schedule. So there'll be ample discussion points along that point of time. And so that can happen anytime after the city manager is hired and comfortable bringing that forward, all the way through the end of the fiscal year. So we have, basically 11 months to figure out how to bring this forward.
Okay, thank you.
Recognize Member Gallo.
Thank you, Chair Duggar. So Nadia, first I wanted to compliment you for what you said and how you said it. I could not be in more agreement with you. We have to change as people, as cities, as nations to absorb diversity. And I will say that diversity is, and here's where it gets really tricky, right? Diversity is a lot more than ethnicity, gender, race, sexual orientation, color, whatever, but also the diversity of ideas, right? And I would argue that in many cases it's that's even more important than the legal requirements of diversity under Title VII. I will say this. I think with that I'll just stop. There really are two elements or two main thrusts to managing diversity. First one is the data, managing the data, the statistics of it. The statistics is what tells you if you have a problem or not. And to have a resource or somebody who could very, very clearly, very succinctly go through everything: hiring, firing, promotions, equities, salary, TCOM. That is as important as the act of hiring or not hiring a minority when might or may not be fully qualified. So I think, and I would like to just suggest that we consider this in two ways, right, or two aspects of it. Again, the data. What does our data tell us about our hiring, firing, and promotion practices? It's that simple. It is what it is. It's data. And then inferences that can be drawn from that. Now, that will identify, or should set us off on vectors, right, of performance improvement, which and special plans, which could, in some cases, drive down to a specific hiring manager who may need some career counseling. And so I just want to look at, again, this in two different ways, and urge you to, when the discussion happens, to potentially consider it that way, because it could be two heads instead of three if we move that path, or something less onerous from a budgeting standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gallo. I see no more questions or comments. We'll go back to HR. Did you guys have any more presentations? I believe insurance.
No.
Looks like.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Patrick, who's up next?
Up next is the City Council, starting on page 691.
I didn't really have a formal presentation. It looks pretty similar to what it's looked in past years, besides it has the mayor's office in it. So we did add the 2 permanent staff members to this, and it is budgeted for a person to support the city council. Other than that, it looks pretty similar to what it has in the past.
Councilor Mitchell.
Thank you. Mayor, did you prepare this budget?
Yes, I think it's an error that your name's on it. It should be mine.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. And then I had a few questions about the professional services. To me, this is really different than anything we've done in the past. And, you know, there's quite a bit of money there, and I had a few questions about it. And I guess I'll go with the heavy hitters. The federal and state representation, is that who we have now? Like, do we pay their salaries out of our budget?
Used to come out of the mayor's budget.
And now it comes out of our budget? Okay.
Yep.
And then the reprographics portion of things. So that 20,000, is it for like budgets, or is it, because we don't really print our stuff anymore? So what is that for?
It's for everybody. Patrick does it in a formula. Right, Patrick?
It is a formula. It is kind of driven by the type of print material, and there's still a lot of the activities that actually printing the document, even though it's not printed in paper form, for getting it ready for distribution electronically. So there is all of the reprographics, the scanning, because reprographics is kind of morphing from more print materials to more digital materials.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, some of the littler items, but still, so like the consultant for council retreat at 30,000. I thought this was a bit much, because I mean, it's 3 days. So I was kind of wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that, what that looked like.
What do you mean? That's what we paid the consultant, or we have it in the budget, yeah, for next year if we need to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand this year, you know, and I didn't know that this year's budget or this year's consultant was so expensive. I was naive to that part of things. And then so the 30,000, with it being, you know, the first year into transition, that made a bit more sense to me. But with the second year, I would think that we'd kind of fall more in line with historical, since we haven't really needed a lot of consulting. I mean, I don't know if my other counselor or the other counselors feel, differently, or do you think the second year, is a good time to still have that amount there? Or, I mean, does anyone else feel differently about that?
Well, I think we're adding a 7th member, and having moderated conversations is the way that it's my preference going forward, instead of we can't moderate it and participate. So I think to have full participation from everyone, now that the mayor is equal to the council, my preference is to have moderated conversations.
I totally agree. I'm just wondering though, if there's a way we could do it in a more economical way. It's 30,000 for 3 days just seems really extravagant to me. And so I'm just thinking, like, the type of moderator we get, we can have a variety of choices, but I just feel like that. And then the consulting for special projects, that seems a bit much too. So I want to make sure that I better understand. I know that we're doing this to serve our community, but it just seems like a bit more than our historical usage.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Sansusi, you are up.
Yeah, one comment with respect to that, which is that the council budget has long had items in it that we didn't actually spend. We tend to set placeholders in the council budget for things that we might do. And we certainly have some discussions ahead of us after we have a 7th councillor on board as to how we want to approach a council retreat or set of council priority setting discussions for the following year. I think that's a decision ahead of us, but putting a placeholder in the budget for money for it is not at all a mistake. I think that we have a history of spending far less than we put into the council budget. The comment that I wanted to make, though, is with respect to the proposal to put an FTE in for support staff for the council, in addition to the support staff that the mayor currently has. I don't in any way object to that, but I think we still have another job ahead of us, which is to have a meaningful conversation among the members of the council about what kinds of functions we want that person to perform if we hire a person for that role. So that we can develop a class specification and a job description that's appropriate to that. But since we haven't had that conversation yet, I personally consider any number that's put in any job title that's put into this budget to be provisional, because, well, we're just not quite sure exactly what we're looking for yet. But I do agree with having it in there, just we don't know for sure exactly what it's going to be. Thank you.
This was just done on behalf of the council, one from staff, that it takes a lot to manage everyone, and that way council has the option and the ability to decide in the future. This is by no means making you hire a staff person, but we budget what we treasure. I wanted it in there for your guys' benefit.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Mr. Auclair, that's kind of why I was thinking about that last discussion we had about the placeholder, was just because I know that's been our practice in the council budget, and we don't necessarily use everything. So I don't understand why we wouldn't put that, for the previous position in, and then if we don't use it, we don't use it. I thought it would be like maybe the same philosophy, or what is the difference between what we're doing and what that program's doing?
I'll just give you my 2 cents because it's in this budget. Mr. Wilson doesn't want us to put that in there. So because if they budget it at a certain amount, in the future city manager has no control over where it's going to be put in. They're asking for it to be department head. What if our new city manager does it? I want to make sure that we lean into this form of government and allow them to do their job and us to do ours. And so I would be really uncomfortable adding a position ahead of a future city manager and taking away that decision from her.
Thank you.
Councillor Hassan, you're up.
Thank you. I just want to second what Councillor Sansusi said about these specialists. I think it's a good placeholder. I do think we also want to have a conversation, and we also need a 7th counselor or our 7th person to be able to do that. I do think that some of the professional services, we're still in this like change. And so I almost think we need that right now, because until we're not in this change, like it does help keep our conversations moving forward and guided. So I think that's important. I think my only really minor comment was the periodicals and subscriptions. I don't have access to any of those things, and I'm not sure if other counselors do. I realize that's not really anyone's responsibility here, but I would just like to make sure that we call to attention that, whoever can help us with that, that'd be really great. So I'll follow up with somebody to look into that.
Those are city subscriptions. They're just housed here, so all employees have access.
Okay, so do we, because I don't have, I don't want to get detailed, I don't have an Oregonian subscription.
We could deal with it offline, Councilor Son.
Thanks, Councilor Son. Councilor Fagan, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. I tend to agree on the professional service side that we need to have placeholders for this year, especially with a new counselor coming on. We have 2 new counselors get their first budget meeting as counselor, or second budget meeting, but first time through the budget as counselors. There's a lot that's new, and I think that makes sense. I'm not sure budgeting for a support person is the right way to go with the council person. If we put it in like we've done in other positions where we create the position and we don't budget it, I think that opens up the budget. It gives us a little bit of breathing room there, but as others have said, we have a lot of discussion to have about what does this person do exactly? How do they support it? Is it really full-time? Is there a different way that we can get the support that's needed? But that said, there are going to be a bunch of there's going to be an additional counselor, so we'll have 7 of us, and maybe that makes sense. But at this point, unless I can be convinced otherwise, my preference would be to put the FTE in, but not fund it until we know what we're talking about as far as what do we want to fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tivnon.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree, Councilor Fagan. And I think once we get the 7th in and we just get a little bit more road behind us with having a permanent city manager in and getting used to things, we'll have a better idea of what this really looks like with this new form of government. Just very quickly, I agree with Councilor Mitchell on that the cost seems a little high for the retreat, but I'm wondering if COVID played into that at all, or the extra precautions that were needed to be taken, the fact that it was 3 days. And I know that the consultant had additional staff with them. It would be nice to know more about the spending that goes into that for next time. I think the public would want to know that too, especially as we're heading into a time where we're looking at cutting things out of our budget. So, and that's it. And yeah, brand new to this, so I'm learning it as everyone is talking right now. But it's very weird to talk about our own budget. So, and I didn't know that the periodicals line item was for everybody in the city. So, taking notes as everyone's talking.
We don't have to also spend the entire budget. We might even want to have 2 different things. We have to do storming, forming, norming, and getting along, and goal setting, and some other things. So I just want to make sure that we have the ability to do what we need to do, and it's budgeted. I'm not going to go try to find a consultant that's going to charge us exactly $30,000, but COVID does cost a lot. If they have to travel, they have to do separate hotel rooms. If we don't bring somebody locally, we have to do upgrades in our own stuff. So there's a lot of expense to do things in a COVID environment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councilor. And Mayor, Mr. Auclair, you're up.
It's just a couple of observations. One was nice about the position of program specialist. It is specifically designated just for the city council. That's the only title of like it. And you have not seen that classification. So we would actually have to bring that to you as you describe it to us, how you want it to read, to bring it to you, for one, to approve the classification and its placement on the salary schedule. One of the options that you could do, instead of just taking out the total funding, you could say, Mr. Auclair, would you please make an amendment to have the funding start January 1st and just budget for a half a year, just so we have a placeholder in there that there is appropriations for the position. So that's one observation. Another thing that I'd like to consider about for your consideration when you're talking about your professional services, as we go into our new form of government and having the regular city manager on board to really affect driving next year's budget, which would be 22-23, the council would need to go into goal setting for the budget development sometime in September, October to give us direction so we can start preparing the budget. So you could be having a retreat twice this next year. One at the beginning to help drive those goals for establishing the budget in 22-23, and then your regular council goals for the city's direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Auclair. Member Kamath.
Yeah, I would first of all like to recognize Councillor Hassan for that excellent question on how much the change of government has cost the city. And I just have a thought regarding that question. I think we should build on that excellent start and keep tracking over time how much that cost changes over time, because it could be a one-time cost because we are going through a period of transition. And let's see how much, so you could use the 2020 as the baseline and keep building on it. It's just a thought, make of it what you will.
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. Any other questions before we move forward? Patrick, we're back to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We're on to now the city administration, including the city manager, city administration, a couple of non-departmental departments, Reprographics, and the Transient Lodging Tax Fund. So I think Ms. Elder is on board. I see her coming online.
Everyone, can you hear me? Excellent. I'm glad to see all of you. I'm Abigail Elder. I'm the director of what's called Community Services and Engagement Department right now, or in the budget, it's the city administration. I think about a year ago when we did them on Teams, and we could only see 4 people at a time, and I was doing it from my home office. Today, I'm in City Hall and I can see all of your faces. So we've come so far in the last year, and I know we are going to come even further. So thank you for your time and attention tonight. I have a quick presentation. I know that time is short, so give me just a second to share my screen. Bring this up. All right, great. So said community services and engagement. See if I can get that to go down. We are structured through a couple different pieces here. As you heard, we used to be the mayor's office department. We have decoupled from the mayor's office, and we are also a bit decoupled from the city manager's office. So city manager's office is the city manager, an executive assistant, and a management analyst. And we, of course, have an important and close relationship with them. And Dr. Wilson is here to answer questions. I'm happy to answer questions on that. But I'd like to focus more on the rest of the department, which you see our organization there. We do a mix of internal and external services. We both serve residents directly, and we also provide technical expertise, consulting, printing services, building support, and just public engagement support for all of the departments in the city. I love this job and the variety that it provides. In an average day, I can touch 16 different topics, and I'm not the expert in any of them, but I get to influence them. And so it's a real privilege to serve in this role. Just a very quick, you'll hear from everybody about COVID. And of course, we, like all other departments, were also affected and moved forward. A couple of the things that we did, our facilities team implemented miles and miles of plexiglass, or at least it feels that way. I wish I had purchased stock in plexiglass early in the pandemic, because we bought a lot of it. We also coordinated a lot of deep cleaning. Facilities met with a lot of programs like court and library to walk through what does this look like? How can you continue to serve people in a socially distanced and safe way? We expanded shelter services both last year and this year to be 24/7. Shelter services this year will end on May 31st. So we are in the last week of shelter services. It's been incredibly important in this pandemic. We coordinated vaccination sites with community partners, agencies, churches, and businesses. Thanks to the mayor's leadership, we had a really important partnership with TVFNR and Nike, which provided some of the most busiest and most efficient vaccination site in the whole state. Staff also supported regional coordination efforts, such as food distribution for local nonprofits, working with partners around the region. And then finally, we received CARES funding from the county for the very lofty title of Community Psyche and Morale, which translated into a number of virtual and limited in-person events. So COVID really challenged us to be creative and thoughtful. And I hope that some of the lessons we've learned and going forward, that we take some of that forward. And I appreciate all of you and your patience with us and your flexibility, particularly those early city council meetings were pretty rough on Teams and calling in. So again, thanks for your patience. Rather than talk about particular departments and programs today, I thought I would highlight some of our most important plans, because one awesome thing about this department is that we're the champions of some of the city's coolest and best plans. So to start, of course, is our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. This plan was updated in 2019 and adopted by council. It was a really challenging year for a lot of our communities, both locally and nationally, with economic hardships, racial justice issues, global pandemic, and more. But despite that, we were able to accomplish quite a bit. And I'm really proud to work in a city that has a really proactive response, and that council has remained steadfast to our commitment. In Patricia's presentation in HR, you heard today an unfunded request for a Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. I want you to know that our team, we have cultural inclusion team and community services, are closely involved in that and look forward to having more conversations with you as we look to make the city of Beaverton even more welcoming. Our next plan, which got a lot of attention and excitement this year, is our Climate Action Plan. This plan was adopted also in the winter of 2019, and work is underway in every department of the city. I asked Scott Keller, who's a senior program manager, for a quick list of some of the things, a few of the things happening, because Mr. Duggar asked last Thursday, and he gave me 35 items like off the top of his head. So these are things that are currently underway or will be soon underway. And if you want more detail, we have a one-year report that was done in December and a March update. I'd be happy to send more information on that. Most notable, recruitment is underway for the Climate Action Task Force. The mayor's done a great job of helping us to raise visibility and recruitment. I think we're going to have a great team, and we're hoping that group will start in July. But even with our approach of having climate action in all of our departments, it's embedded with all of our groups. We have exactly one dedicated staff member whose sole role is to coordinate work, coordinate with community partners, educate staff and the public, and support our climate action goals. In Exhibit 2 of your budget, there was a requested but unfunded position to add to the sustainability program. We did an analysis with HR. We believe that it would be a program specialist position that would primarily support the Climate Action Task Force, and then also support the analyst who is our lead for climate action. Without that position, we'll need to delay or limit some of our projects, and we'll struggle to fully support the task force. Another climate action item that I wanted to bring up that's also unfunded but requested is the make ready infrastructure for electric vehicles or for zero emission vehicles. This is a lot of the invisible stuff that needs to be in place before you actually put up the charging station. It's the electrical service, the conduit, the cabling, the panels, all that supply side stuff. So we have staff from fleet and facilities and sustainability working together, consulted with technical advisors from PGE to put together a plan to have charging for fleet vehicles or city vehicles at the Beaverton building, the operations building, which is Public Works on Allen Boulevard, and the Public Safety Center. We estimate this project to be about $521,000. And that is a big number, at least it is in my world. But we know that when we purchase vehicles, they have a lifespan for the city of about 8 to 15 years. So the longer we delay on this particular project, the longer we will need to buy gas-powered vehicles, and it will take longer for us to reach our goals in the climate action plan. So happy to, and we've got a pretty substantial memo that staff wrote on this if you wish to kind of dig deeper into this topic.
Ms. Elder, I believe Mayor
Yeah.
Beatty has a question.
Oh, thank you. Please.
Thank you. I just had a question on your org chart that's in the budget.
Yeah.
I thought we recently approved a CS engagement associate director.
Oh, I know. That was a, sorry, that was a reclassification, or not a reclass. That was a budget adjustment. It was HR did an analysis for internal equity, and a position was moved up to be equal with other positions in the organization.
So is it not an associate director, or was this org chart done printed prior to that?
I think it is, the title is associate director. Yes, that is Jerry Allen's position.
Can you resend an org chart to the city council so we understand your department?
Sure.
Thank you.
And Jerry, I think it's, yeah, all right, I'll send more information for you. Thank you. Any other questions before I continue?
I think you're good to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Duggar. All right, our next plan is the community vision, which was adopted, I think in 2012 and then updated in 2016. The Vision Advisory Committee met with council in March, and we're encouraged to move forward with an update of the community vision. So the budget that you see before you includes funds for a limited duration project manager and some additional consultant fees and supplies. Included in one of the budget amendments is a package for Zen City. Zen City is a subscription of software and experts that do statistically valid and scientific surveys. They report on community trends. They do data gathering and analysis. And we're looking for to use Zen City, which I think the total amount is $12,000, to supplement community vision, and hopefully we can reduce our reliance on some of our consultants in that way.
Ms. Elder,
Yeah.
Member Gallo has a question.
Thank you. Mr. Gallo.
Always good seeing you.
Great to see you, thanks.
Likewise. Sorry to take you back to, I'm trying to find the right page.
Yeah.
Trying to take you back to the sustainability. The $142,000 for the Make Ready infrastructure. That can you confirm that is not in the current budget, or is it? I didn't see it.
That is not in the budget.
It is not in the budget.
Right.
Okay.
Patrick, if you are online, do you want to speak to any of that?
So I was actually responding to Mr. Gallo on an email. So what was the question?
Oh, sorry about that. The Make Ready infrastructure, it's not in the budget.
Yes. So if you were to request me to bring forward a formal amendment, I can certainly do that. It will come from the general fund as a resource. Going into, we create a separate program in the what we call our capital development fund, which is 301, and create a separate program for EV activities for infrastructure development. And Ms. Elder, I believe that Mr. Keller's recommendation is that we bring forward two of the locations, which would be the Beaverton building and the public safety building. We can maybe defer the public works building until the next following fiscal year.
Thank you. And Patrick, you read exactly where I was going. Thank you. I would like that we do bring it forth in the form of an amendment so we could discuss it on its appropriate merits.
I will do so.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent, thank you. Other questions? Mr. Duggar, I really appreciate you calling out. I'm not seeing the hands raised, so that's perfect. Great. Then my last plan is one that we don't yet have, and that is the facility master plan. The city owns about over 400,000 square feet, which includes the PRCA when that comes online next year. The facility master plan has long been a priority of City Council. We've definitely heard that, to develop and prioritize our existing and future needs. As we go forward, City Council will be consulted in the structure and the content of the plan, We anticipate a special focus on public works and operations, the Griffith building, replacing shelter services, and if council chooses, a potential multicultural center, in addition to the current structure of our, or the current conditions of our current buildings and future plans. The budget that you have before you includes funds for a facility master plan. Our estimate is, I think, $500,000 for that. A project manager who would lead this process with a consultant, but also oversee some of our other repair projects and contracts within the city. When I shared a request for that position with my fellow department heads, most of them jumped up and down and said, yes, we definitely want you to have that position, and I would like that person to do my projects first. So it is a citywide need and desire. This budget also includes a facility maintenance technician position. Patrick or Mr. Auclair talked about that last Thursday, as a position that would be moved from the CDD building division into facilities, a position that might otherwise be eliminated. And that position would be tasked with supporting the Patricia Research Center for the Arts, the district building garage, and other facilities as we move forward. And finally, I'd like to end on a long-held plan that is coming to fruition, and that's the hard work of the Transient Lodging Tax Fund and the Patricia Research Center for the Arts. Now that the PRCA is fully separate from the city, I want to recognize that our arts program, currently the program of 3 staff members that we do in the city, is also in the TLT fund. And as we separate PRCA from other city services, one thing you might entertain is moving the arts program back into the general fund, because it is currently a transfer fund from the general fund into TLT in order to fund our arts program. That's only a cleanup paper piece. That's not a dollar and cents impact. I just bring it up as a, because the PRCA is in a different spot than it was a year ago. The Beaverton Arts Foundation is the nonprofit that's been selected by City Council to operate the PRCA. So the budget before you shows the transfer to the Beaverton Arts Foundation, and it's one part of their budget. Chris Azukian, the executive director of the BAF, is actually with us tonight and available to answer questions, but he and Pat Reeser, chair of the BAF board, provided an overview of planned operations and a budget narrative to City Council on May 11th. And we are expecting a grand opening in spring of 2022. The picture here, I think, is from a couple weeks ago. Every day that I walk by the center, it grows and changes, and I'm super excited to see it come to fruition. And with that, I have finished my slides and be happy to answer any additional questions. I want to thank all of you and the finance department for all of their hard work, and then the super smart and talented people that I get to work with in this department, many of whom are on the line. And if I say something wrong or if I am incomplete, I'm going to count on them to jump in with more details. Mr. Duggar, back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Elder. It's always lovely to feel your energy. You're always so positive.
This is so great.
Councilor Sansusi, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Elder, for the presentation on this. I wanted to make 2 quick comments on the lodging tax and what you suggested about the arts program. I agree with you that I think it would make sense for the arts program as yet another program of the city to be listed as yet another program of the city. I think we will reach a point, and we're not there now, and we may not be there for a year or 2 or 3, but there will be a point where the lodging tax fund may spin off more cash than is necessary to fund the ongoing operations of the PRCA. And at that point, that then becomes a funding source for other, basically general fund programs of the city. So I think anticipating that, maybe not doing it in this budget, but maybe doing it next budget would make a lot of sense. I think, though, that going through all of the items under your department just reminded me that at some point we may want to have a discussion, council level discussion, about relative resources applied to different programs within there. I did find it interesting. As much as I love the great work that the arts program does, it's interesting that there are more people working in the arts program than there are in the community services program. And the community services program is serving a much more complicated and much more difficult set of services for the community. So I think those are the kinds of sort of ruminating conversations we need to have over the next number of months to figure out, maybe for next year's budget, what are the right allocations of dollars and resources to the various programs under this part of the city's budget. But for now, this is fine. I'm happy with what's been presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's important to note many of the programs and services in this department are 2 and 3 and 4 people programs. They do, I think, an amazing amount of work, both in quantity and quality in the small teams that we have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hassan, you're up.
Thank you. Councillor Stansusi, you brought up an interesting point that now I want to dig into, but I won't. But I do want us to make sure we're talking about how we're allocating our people so that we're making sure that the allocation of resources is in the right place. I did request Mr. Auclair to just give us some sort of financial understanding. I'm newer to this, and this isn't directed towards you. This is more of a general sort of comment, is when the community voted for this new charter, I think some of the cost implications that we're starting to see are really kind of showing up. And I just want us to be really thoughtful of how we are spending this. I know all of these are kind of needed expenses, and I respect that. But I also do want to be thoughtful of how that continues to show up over the course of several years, because, you know, my hope is that we're able to just make sure we're being really intentional about how we're spending this money, and that we're just really watching these dollars, especially in a time when we have so many people struggling. So thank you, Mr. Auclair, for sending some additional documents that sort of helped us understand the shift. I hope that we just continue to think about what the voters wanted and how we're showing up in a financial way as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan. Councillor Mitchell, you're up.
Thank you so much. I just want to second what Councillor Hassan said. I think it's so important that, especially for home ownership, we want to be able to make it attainable. And the more we drive up our taxes with expense is something that, you know, I think was unintended. So I really appreciate that outlook. And I think that is what we're trying to do. But I think that sometimes we have to, like she said, with intention, really bring that up, because I think it's sometimes, you know, we get caught up in the, oh, we have to do this. And so it's kind of hard to step back and say, is this really necessary, or could it be something else? So that's why I appreciate our committee members that bring their perspective on as well, because like I said, we're knee deep all the time. So to hear the new perspectives, I really appreciate. So thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Auclair, I didn't see any other questions. Quick question for you from my perspective. Does the transit lodging taxes reflect, I believe there's at least 1 or 2 hotels under construction. Does that reflect the anticipated revenue?
Yeah, Chair Duggar, yes, it does. And in fact, even in this fiscal year that we're currently in, we had a incremental amount for one, the new Hyatt House that opened in the December, January, and then a slight increase for the 2 hotels that are over there on in what I call the Cornell Oaks area, that will hopefully be opening sometime late this spring, which is here almost, early summer. And so those have been factored into this year's budget and also into next year's budget. Now, granted, I monitor the transient lodging tax receipts each month, and each month they're getting a little bit better as far as the getting back the increment, or not the increment, but to the levels that we had in pre-COVID-19. We're still probably, I'm guessing, about 22% lower than what we would normally receive on a month-to-month basis about right now. And I should be able to give an update to the City Council on Thursday about where the last monthly receipts are in proportion to how much they are lower than pre-COVID-19.
Thank you. And I believe we're okay to move forward unless there are other questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Elder.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we are up for the library fund, and for following it along in your book, We're starting on page 905, and I believe that Mr. Ferdman is on screen.
Thank you, Mr. Auclair. Susan, one step ahead of me as usual. Thank you so much. Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Budget Committee. My name is Glenn Ferdman, and I am the Beaverton City Library Director. And it is my honor and privilege to present to you next year's Library Fund budget, beginning with this brief presentation. So next slide, please. To begin with, I'd like to share some basic information about the library and bonus points if you know all the following facts already. Beaverton City Library has been serving the community since 1938. We have 2 locations, the main library and the Murray Shoals branch. We are a founding member of the Washington County Cooperative Library Services, otherwise known as WCCLS, beginning in 1976, our bicentennial year. We are one of the quote unquote big 3 libraries, which includes Hillsborough and Cedar Mill Bethany. We account for 1/5 of all items in the WCCLS catalog, excuse me, and approximately 1/4 of all items circulated. We're one of the busiest libraries in the entire state in terms of the number of visitors, items circulated, and number of programs offered. And we have one of the largest and most diverse collections of children's literature in the state. Next slide, please. Thanks to a process which began last December involving the library and community, we have a new strategic plan, including our first ever vision statement. The intent was to develop a process and a plan which was adaptable, nimble, and responsive to the needs of the community. To date, we've developed new mission, vision, values, and strategic directive statements with goals, objectives, measures currently in the works. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk about some of our accomplishments during the past current fiscal year, that is. Some of you may have heard about the global pandemic, which began last year and which forced the closure of our library in March of 2020. I'm proud to say that despite the closure, our intrepid library staff lost no time and within several days had developed several storytime videos, which thereafter blossomed into a series of synchronous and asynchronous story times in multiple languages. Here then is a brief chronology of some of the ways we responded to the pandemic in order to continue to provide library services to the community for students and teachers, parents and caregivers, job seekers, folks seeking information on a variety of topics and for different purposes, to support the information needs of our most vulnerable members for recreation and entertainment, and to foster and maintain connection and community. We began developing virtual programs for all ages beginning in March of 2020. We launched an Ask the Librarian library service by email and phone beginning in the spring of 2020. After the lockdown, we resumed providing books and programs delivered to local daycares, Head Starts, WIC and pediatrician offices, laundromats, etc. We launched a book giveaway service program at Beaverton School District free lunch sites beginning in the spring of 2020 and have to date given away more than 12,000 books. And we began servicing approximately a dozen little free library sites beginning in the summer of 2020, sprucing them up and also replenishing their books. In June of 2020, we launched our curbside walk-up service, and we have now served more than 80,000 individuals since that time. In July this past year, we launched our computer lab, including free wireless printing, copying. And in June this past year, we launched in January of this year, we launched what we call our grab and go service, providing browsing, holds pickup, card registrations with restricted capacity on site. We were the first library in the county cooperative to provide this service several months before other libraries reopened their doors. And one of the main reasons we did so, we reopened as early as we did, was to provide access on behalf of some of our most vulnerable community members, including those who are not able to take advantage of our online offerings due to lack of internet and or computer or smartphone access. Next slide, please. Not content to just revise our service model in the midst of a pandemic, we also undertook the following activities. We developed our new strategic plan, as mentioned earlier. We also continued phase 2 of the library reorganization, which had been temporarily put on hold at the beginning of the pandemic, whose goal was to continue to reorganize the library by function. For example, public services, collections, and community engagement, as opposed to by age, children, teens, and adults, allowing for more cross-disciplinary approach to programs, collections, and services, leveraging the wonderful synergies and talents of our staff, while also providing more opportunities for cross-training, growth, development, and advancement for our staff. Our current program areas as a result of the recent restructuring are public services, materials, community engagement, and administration. The reorganization also called for the hiring of 2 new supervisors approved by the City Council this past March to provide better day-to-day management of library operations, in addition to growth and advancement opportunities for staff. And for the addition of a 0.5 FTE outreach specialist to meet the demand for programs, collections, and services at local daycares, WIC and pediatrician offices, laundromats, and soon barbershops. And thanks to support from our wonderful colleagues in Facilities and Public Works, we also embarked on the following improvements to our facilities. We began construction of 4 new study rooms as identified in the 2018 Library Space Plan, which was then spearheaded by my colleague and Library Director predecessor, Abigail Elder, scheduled for completion at the end of this month. Restoration of the woodworking throughout the main library for the first time in 20 years. Restriping of the east and staff parking lots, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the library's new makerspace, also part of the 2018 Library Space Plan, which was completed in March 2020, just as the pandemic shut everything down, whose grand opening we are in the planning phases of. Next slide, please. And of course, Mr. Chair, the information, however impressive it might be and is, only tells half the story. The other half comes in the form of feedback from our residents about how the library has impacted their lives. So permit me then, please, if you would, a few moments to share several examples of residents' feedback we've received over the course of the past year. Number 1, to the good folks at the Beaverton Library, thank you for the guitar and for letting me keep it for so long. I had the good fortune to find it available back in March, the day before everything shut down. I played it so very much during quarantine. It helped keep me sane. I've now renewed it several times, but it is time for it to come home. I added the capo to the collection. Consider it a donation. Thank you for all you do for the community. Andy. 2, just wanted to thank you for figuring out, you can stay on that slide, sorry. Just wanted to thank you for figuring out how to do library outreach programs, especially with and for kids during this crazy virus era. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you again when you are able to safely open. Hugs from a library aficionado. 3, this email is in praise of the Beaverton City Library and its wonderful staff and dedicated librarians. I found myself without internet at home as of yesterday afternoon. Long story short, our internet provider abruptly and without warning shut down service. Luckily, I was able to use the computer lab at the library and connect to email, get updates on my upcoming school semester, etc. Internet access has now become an essential service. Our library is a lifeline to this community. I've gone there during blackouts, excuse me, heat waves, and other events and life interruptions. Thank goodness it's there. And in truly heroic fashion, the library has made many services available even during this awful pandemic. I cannot say enough good things about the folks who work there. We are so lucky to have all our public libraries, Beaverton City Library in particular. And lastly, this one came in during the early days of the pandemic while we were still closed to the public. I wanted to give some good feedback on the library story times you've been doing online. My son is 3 years old and an avid reader. He really misses the library and is sad that it is closed. When we drove by the library this week, he asked if the library didn't like him anymore. Since his dad works for the fire department, we've been talking a lot about how people are getting sick and we're trying to keep germs from spreading. So we explained that's why the library is closed. He understood, but was still sad he couldn't get books or go to story time. He was so happy to do story time online this week. He saw the normal librarians and it was a routine activity he's used to. At 3 years old, anything vaguely routine right now has been great for his mental health and reduces stress. We were all clapping, singing, and reading together as a family, and he was all smiles. So in these unique times of COVID mitigations, I'd really like to thank you for getting little bits of normalcy to kids. At least for my son, he's happier after story time every day. It's something I hope you're able to keep up until the stay-at-home order lifts. Thank you. Next slide, please. Well, here we are. I'd now like to shift the focus to the coming fiscal year and begin with a brief overview of the library's revenue sources. Approximately 60% of the library's revenue comes from the county in the form of their operating fund and the local levy. The majority of the rest comes from the city, with some coming from the Friends, Foundation, grants, and donations. This past January, some of you may have heard, the entire library cooperative, of which the library is a part, went fine-free. This will result in an anticipated loss of approximately $60,000 in revenue for next year. On the other hand, the benefits to our user community have been significant. Immediately upon going fine-free, 3,500 Beaverton library patrons had their library access restored, which was previously denied as a result of excessive overdue fines. In addition, since going fine-free, the number of overdue items and the number of patrons with overdue items are down by 6% and 10% respectively. And as noted in a WCCLS press release, the system-wide change is a huge step forward for more equitable library access. Research shows that overdue fines disproportionately impact low-income communities and communities of color. The fine-free policy was communicated to patrons in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, and Arabic, including a postcard mailed to every resident of Washington County to inform them of this important change. Next slide, please. The remaining 3 slides touch on our goals for next year. One of our most important of which is the continuation of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, including continued implementation of a recruitment strategy in conjunction with our colleagues in HR to diversify our library staff. Continued diversification of our collections and programming, for example, more diverse voices and viewpoints and participation. Review of our policies and procedures, services, and programs with a DEI lens, for example, our rules for use, collection development, programming. Implementation of our DEI toolkit, developed for us by a PSU Hatfield School Summer Fellow, with our internal Anti-Racism Action Committee taking the lead on the implementation of the toolkit and review of policies and procedures. Next slide, please. Additional goals include fleshing out and implementing our new strategic plan, including development of additional goals, objectives, and measures, and staff conversations around the meaning, interpretation, and application of our mission, vision, values, and strategic directives. Completing the integration of phase 2 of the library reorganization, including onboarding of the new supervisors and working with individual staff to help them acclimate to their new roles. Expanding the footprint of our much in-demand community outreach service, including providing books, story times, and other programs for children and their caregivers at daycares, WIC offices, pediatrician offices, Virginia Garcia centers, laundromats, and again, soon barbershops. And continue to refine our service model post-pandemic, including experimenting with a hybrid model of bricks and clicks, for example, virtual and on-site programs, curbside service, and interior spaces. Next slide, please. And last but certainly not least, resumption of our social worker access at the main library 3 times a week to provide housing, utility, and other assistance on site, introduction of the new study rooms and makerspace to the community, continue to work with our colleagues in Community Development Department on plans for the South Cooper Mountain Branch Library, continue to work with Washington County Library Cooperative Services to expand Wi-Fi access outside of our buildings, and complete negotiations with WCCLS for the new service and network IGAs. Next slide, please. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation, and now I'd be happy to entertain any questions from members of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Furban. What questions do we have for the library? Mayor Beatty, you have the floor.
No questions, just comments. I was one of the lucky parents of a toddler that has attended every single one of your your book reading online. When we go into the library, my child thinks your staff are like rock stars. She follows them around. We talk about them in our house like they're part of our family. And I know how hard it was for staff to do that from their house and be available to the public and everyone else. So like every other letter, there's no words that I could do. The day we went to the library was like the happiest day of Ayla's life when we finally opened. So thank you for your team and everything you do. We have a lot of things for the library and the Beatty House.
Thank you, Mayor.
Member Satmary, you're up.
Myself. Thanks. And I don't have a comment either, but this might be a good time to pitch an idea that I have that we did at the University of Washington pretty successfully. I would urge you to consider to create through your contingency funds alternative revenue streams. So for example, you could take a 2-year position for development, i.e. fundraising, and it's not unheard of to get maybe $200,000–300,000 a year, say, for the library. Or you could also get a development specialist and name buildings. You have a public safety building now, it has no name. You could easily get, say, $1 million, $1.5 million for that. Let me give you some numbers. Now, this doesn't really translate to Beaverton, but the library at the University of Washington got about $50 million a year in development or fundraising. If you name the business school, which they did when I was there, you got $3 to $4 million for the business school. You got about $30 million for a computer science building. So it might be an alternative income stream in a number of areas. You can't do it for everything, but you can do it for some things, and it would sort of expand the reach of, say, the library or other types of programs that you might have.
Thank you, Mrs. Mary. Just in the interest of full disclosure, Mrs. Mary wears a lot of hats in the city. In addition to being a member of the Budget Committee, he is also a member of the board of the Friends of the Library, as well as the foundation. And it'd be my pleasure to work with you, Mrs. Mary, and other members of the foundation and Friends to pursue those funding opportunities that you mentioned. So thank you.
Councilor Fagan, you're up.
And speaking of contingency, it wouldn't be a budget committee meeting if I didn't bring up the library's contingency, which, because of the changes we made in the last couple of years after discussing it and making changes, is not a standalone account. And I really appreciate that move that we made to bring it into the general fund. I think it's appropriate. And it was nice to look at this budget this year and not have to worry about contingency for the library as a standalone entity. On top of that, just Glenn, thank you so much for all the work you've done. I know it's been a crazy year for all of us, but the ability for the library to flex and be nimble to create the needed services for the community members and families has been just extraordinary. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilor Fagan.
Thank you, Councilor. It would not be Budget Committee if we did not bring that up every year. So thank you. Looks like Member Gallo is up next.
I was actually typing to, never mind.
Okay.
Exactly what I was going to say. Thank God for the 11% contingency. Thank you guys. And Glenn, just phenomenal job. It's well appreciated. Library continues to be one of the things that makes Beaverton be truly special, and you and your staff are to be commended for it. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Councilor Hassan, you're up.
Yeah, just more comment as well. You know, when we talk about equity and what racial equity looks like, you know, schools are the institutions that have the ability to help level the playing field, but libraries are also a really big part of that in terms of people having access to libraries and being able to go into libraries. And like Mayor Beatty, when we finally got to go into the library, the excitement, my 2-year-old says library, it's a really exciting thing. And so, you know, kudos to you and your staff for pivoting. Kudos to you and your staff for coming up with videos. just being really, thoughtful and intentional in how we can respond. And then also thank you so much for like finding a way to open back up, because man, that time that we get to go to the library for a mom of 3 kids is really so important. So thank you so much for all you guys have done.
Thank you, Councilor Fan.
Mr. Auclair, you're up now.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I did want to just make one clarification because I thought I heard Councilor Fagan mention about the library being folded into the general fund. And it's still its own standalone fund. So it's still a separate fund of the city. I know we've had discussions about whether or not when to or if to bring the general fund into, library operations and general fund, but the budget we have before us is a status quo separate fund for the library, although its contingency is improving. Many thanks to Glenn for doing a lot of reorganizations that has actually made net reductions in his FTEs, especially given the fact that our cost of employee services, our cost of employee benefits and salaries has increased so much with our PERS costs. So I just wanted to thank Glenn for bringing forward his continual revamping of library services, consolidating programs, because he did consolidate a couple of programs into one, so to better use his staff and managerial resources. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Auclair. Councilor Tivnon.
Yes, thank you. I'm echoing what everyone else has said and just incredibly impressed at how nimble and proactive your team was in figuring out ways to still give services that were much needed when a lot of other people were struggling to figure that out. So maybe someday there will be a book in your library on how to manage through a pandemic written by the staff at the Beaverton Library. And also one other comment, I was really happy to hear it, but actually not that surprised that the return rate has actually gone up a little bit since you got rid of fines. There's something about having that punitive cost associated with it, I think kind of gives people a sense of shame that they did something wrong, and it creates an aversion and they just don't go back because they don't feel welcome because they're on the hook for something that they did wrong. And removing that, I think it breeds loyalty, and it allows them extra time that they obviously need with the book, but also to know that whenever they bring it back, it's going to be okay and they can get more. And that is just the absolute most inspiring thing, is to see the proof right there that you remove that, and it's not a huge impact or cost to the library to do that. In fact, it brings people back. So really excited to see that, and thank you for sharing those numbers with us.
Thank you, Councilor Tivnon.
Thank you, Councilor. I don't see any more questions, but I do have one myself, Mr. Ferdman. And I'm looking at page 909. So this is the fiscal budget. It looks like our book budget is 475, although it reads as though maybe that's for the last fiscal year. That seems low relative to Hillsborough. Across the other numbers, Hillsborough seems to be about 10% larger, and that's consistent with the size of the city. I was wondering if you could comment on that, particularly in regards to your bullet point earlier around diversification of the library's content and materials. Is that an appropriate number to both replace items, the kind of renewal that we go through annually, and also the diversification of the materials? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The answer is no, it's not. And the reason why that number is what it is because we, in order to build our contingency budget, we reduced that number down from what it had previously been. However, if you notice in this year's budget, our request is to bring it back to, I believe it's fiscal year 2019 level. I think that's at about 575 if memory serves. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing, because we're trying to guesstimate how many people we could allow back in the building this coming fiscal year because of the pandemic, and what impact that would have on circulation, versus, here's the other side of that chicken and egg proposition, is publishers, the way of the publishing industry, the way that it works is a lot of these titles, if you don't order them when they're available, you lose the window. So if we don't provide enough of a budget to purchase the items when they're available, we may never be able to purchase them. So we're looking for that sweet spot. And we felt that, well, let's go back, 2019 seemed like a good year because that was kind of the sweet spot in the middle of where we were, where we wanted to be and where we were hoping to go. And so that's how we came up with that number.
Thank you for the context. That's super helpful. Councillor Sansucci, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to refer to what Mr. O'Clair said earlier and maybe ask if sometime during this upcoming fiscal year, we could perhaps get a little memo with the pros and cons of folding the library fund into the general fund 100%, as opposed to keeping it separate. I realize there's probably some pros and there's probably some cons, so it'd be interesting to have that discussion sometime this year. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions before we move forward or comments? Mr. O'Clair, back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's about 8:06. Wanted to check time for folks, see if they need a kind of any type of a break before we head into the police department. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. So, Mr. Chair, what do you think about a 10-minute break?
That works for me. Everyone maybe back at 8:16. That sound good? Thank you. We're mostly back. So I think we can probably get started. Mr. O'Clair, is that to you on the police department?
Yes, Chair Duggar, we're up with the police department for you.
We cannot hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now? Let me.
I can hear him.
Maybe
Yes.
I can't hear you.
Chair, can you hear me now?
I think he took himself off and is coming back.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Patrick, do you have a second?
Who was that?
Pat, it's Caesar. Do you have a second, or are you working on something?
No, so go ahead.
No, just like, is there any news, any financial news or economic news that's interesting you right now that I should be aware of? That I should be aware of?
Nothing on the city's perspective for financial news coming forward.
Oh, no, I mean personally. I mean you.
I think we're just trying to fill time until we get Chair Duggar back.
Yeah.
No, nothing from my perspective.
Okay, no, just that's what I do most of the time. I watch like tech review and like econ news. So.
And let's see.
I do not see him yet in the attendee panel. Patrick, let me know if you get a text or an email from him.
Okay.
And the question to either the mayor or to the vice chair is, would you like to wait for the chair to return, or would you like to proceed?
I'll let the vice chair take over. Seems appropriate.
Thank you, Mayor Beatty.
Here he comes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and proceed while we hope that Chair Duggar can come back.
Okay, just where we are on page 986 of the budget with the police department, and we have Deputy Chief here with us with I think some other members of his team. So Deputy Chief Williams, the floor is yours.
And for reference, I'm back. I apologize. I don't know what happened. It turned off.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you. It's very nice seeing everybody this evening. Thank you, members of the Budget Committee, City Council, and Mayor, for your time this evening. I will not have a slide deck or videos for you this evening, just some introductory comments and then an opportunity for you to ask questions about our budget. I am Deputy Chief Jeff Williams, and with me this evening is Michelle Harold, our Program Manager, Captain Eric Othis, who leads the Support Services Bureau, Captain Paul Wandell, who leads the Administrative Bureau, and Captain Mike Smith, who leads our Operations Bureau. The input into our fiscal year 21-22 budget reflects our deep desire to provide professional, courageous, and compassionate safety and responsiveness to criminal activity in our community. I want to share with you that earlier this month, your police department was awarded state accreditation as a law enforcement agency through the Oregon Accreditation Alliance. This accreditation is voluntary and awarded based upon our department living up to a body of standards deemed essential to the protection of life, health, safety, and the rights of people we serve, and having exemplified the best professional practices in the conduct of our responsibilities to our community. All sworn members of the Beaverton Police Department take an oath of office which acknowledges our fundamental duty to serve humankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect all persons against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder. This oath is internally consistent with the City of Beaverton's commitment to equity. Our goals and obligations as sworn and non-sworn members of the department and the city's upcoming equity statement are complementary and will go far toward helping us achieve a better Beaverton for everyone. Again, thank you for your time. We are proud to serve this community and are happy to answer questions you may have regarding our proposed budget. Thank you.
Recognize member Zat Mary. You have the floor.
Thanks. I just have a quick question out of total ignorance, Jeff. First of all, you do a great job, and I was impressed reading the budget, all of the different programs you have and so on, really impressive. My question is, in terms of an overall budget, how does it compare to similar cities with the same demographics as we have in Beaverton?
That's a fantastic question, and I don't know. I just really couldn't feel confident giving you an answer to that. We certainly could do some research and get that. Mr. O'Clair may have an idea. I think it would be safe to say very similarly situated, but I would be a little uncomfortable going much further beyond that without looking at some other comparable budgets.
Jeff, one consideration on that point, comparing Hillsborough to Beaverton, they're a little bit larger for us. They're over about 106,000. We're still at about 96,000, about 97,000. So that would be one budget that you could maybe speak to. I don't know if you could do that up from what you know of the city of Hillsborough and the way that it's structured. Granted, their demographics might be a little bit different, but as far as population size, they are pretty comparable to Beaverton.
Okay, we could definitely look into that and provide a response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Recognize Councillor Sansucci.
Thanks, and thank you, Mr. Setmeyer, for bringing that up, because I think that is actually an interesting comparison. We do that. Some of the other departments have had the opportunity to do those sorts of comparative numbers with other jurisdictions, and I think this would be a reasonable time for us to take a look at that. You know, I'm not in a position at this point to make any particular recommendations with respect to what really is a hold-in-place budget. I think, you know, you don't have any significant asks in here, and that's very reasonable. As you well know, I think the council has started into, but has not completed, some discussions about certain aspects of police programs and police policies in Beaverton, but I don't think we're at the point of being able to make specific recommendations right now. There is, however, one that's been held over for quite a long time, and it's probably more in your camp than in ours. And that is the possibility of setting up speed or red light cameras at other intersections in the city. We've talked about that in the past, but I think there's a fascinating statistic for those who didn't happen to notice it on page 1013, 1014 of the budget, which shows that when the state legislature permitted and the city implemented the detection of speeding through green lights at our instrumented intersections, the number of automated citations issued was dramatic. And that just tells you how many people have over time grown accustomed to speeding 11 miles per hour or more over the speed limit through green lights at our 4 intersections. I think it would be a really good time for us to investigate where else in the city we are having crashes or we are having unsafe driving on a consistent basis, where we might want to consider installing more of these mechanisms, because it's a pretty significant problem. So yeah, I just think it's one of those things we ought to get into this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sansucci. Councillor Hassan.
Yeah, and I would say, I think there are some more council conversations that we're looking forward to having soon as well. I did have a couple comments. So there's a lot of references to like community-based policing in the budget, but then there's also a language that's very like maintain high visibility patrols. Like it feels like one or the other. Is there like a reason specific language is used or not? Because I see community-based policing, but then it's like maintain high visibility profiles. And I'd like to understand, those feel different. And I don't know if I'm just taking it more literally than I should.
Thank you. We try to be very cognizant and careful of the words we choose. And just, at my first, I guess, inclination is that, community policing and high visibility patrol are not mutually exclusive, that we can accomplish, the goals of the department and those set, by the council by partnering with the community. And, in the most simplest terms, sometimes community policing involves traffic related issues where a member of the community wants to partner with us regarding, speeding vehicles or something going on in their neighborhood. And our responsiveness to that may be high visibility patrol. And so, we try to be sensitive to that, but I don't think that they're necessarily mutually exclusive.
Thank you. And then I was reading a little bit about on page 1004, if y'all are interested in reading along with me under bicycle team. There's been some coordination and cleanup of like illegal camps. Is that related to houselessness so that I can understand it?
In a very broad sense, yes. So predominantly our bike team responds to situations, mostly individuals on private property. And we have a very robust coordinated response that involves some other departments over at City Hall. Ultimately, we don't want to deal with these situations in the kind of the criminal justice side of things. We want to look for more long-term solutions, provide services, coordinate services, and get people the things they need to actually address some of the underlying issues. Having said that, there are times when we may need to pursue a criminal action if there's a crime happening or we're dealing with private property.
Okay, thank you. And then my last comment is more of a comment, and I've talked with the chief about this already, so I'm just kind of bringing everyone else to speed. One of the things that's really been on my mind is our use of social media and how we use social media to still tell stories and share messages. And one of the things that came to my attention, I think someone tagged me in something a couple months ago, and it was a post about something, and you could see some of the comments were getting a little on the side of racist. Not your fault, right? But you are a public account and people will make a lot of public comments. And so one of the asks that I had of the chief, and that I will continue to ask us as counselors, but also members of the budget committee to think about, is what does a kind of social media outreach or budget look like? And what messages do we send when we post things? And I'll give you an example. About a month or two ago, there was a post and it said, have you seen this person? And there was a lot of concern around, were we contributing to potentially racial profiling because of the person that was chosen for the photo, and asking people to maybe kind of be police in that. And I did talk to the chief about that. And so it's just something I want to think about in terms of funding, in terms of allocation of like marketing budgets and what those budgets go to, and making sure that those budgets are really helping us provide services to victims, and really being thoughtful of criminalizing residents versus not criminalizing residents. And so I think it'll be an ongoing conversation we'll have as council as well, but just something I think that's really important to draw attention to, because when we are a public facing entity, we cannot delete comments or comment on comments. So when people make comments like, oh, does this person even speak English, which happens, on the social media, I want us to be really thoughtful of how we're representing compassion and integrity and the things that I know that the police and us as the city, excuse me, so sorry, that we stand for in terms of the work that we want to do. So just something I want to be really thoughtful about is how we're thinking about community services and community services budgets, and how we're using that and the stories that we're telling as a city.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Beatty.
Thank you. And Councillor Hassan's point on media, the PIO is a member of the police department, and it is a assignment versus a communication expert. So perhaps we should look at training of those positions to do some of that communication work. I'm not suggesting replacing the police officer with a person, but perhaps doing a little bit more in-depth training for the PIOs. I do know it's common. The fire department has PIOs that are members of the fire team. I'm just saying there's other people that spend their entire professional career training to communicate to the public. So how can we support them to do that work? I think would be a great addition to Councillor Hassan's points. So I actually looked into Dave's questions about policing. When I was going through the budget, I actually looked at our neighboring Hillsborough's budget is 42 million, Tigard's budget is 22 million. Our budget increase is 5.27, Hillsborough's increase is 5, Tigard's increase is 1.2. We have 187 sworn officers. Hillsborough PD has 198 and Tigard has 94. So I have a lot of that information because I wondered the same question you did, so I went and researched that. To everyone else's point, this is a bit of a status quo budget to kind of get us over into the next year, but I did have a couple points that I wanted to highlight. I couldn't find anywhere in the budget, and forgive me, DC, for not sending this in advance, and if you have to answer later, that's fine. How much of the increase was associated to WACA's increase? Because I could see it clearly laid out in Hillsborough and I couldn't find it in ours.
If you give me a minute or two, I think I can probably find it. So I will.
I think it would help. I think it would help. Hillsborough reported that 1.2% of theirs was WACA fees, and I think that would help us better understand our increase as well. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's the universal call center that when you dial 911, that's who you call. And kind of on that point as well, up until COVID, they weren't taking mental health response calls, and during COVID they are. So are we negotiating with them that they will continue to do those services as we're putting mental health people in our budget? Because I don't know if that was an agreement just for COVID and something that's going to continue, or they'll reverse and stop being the call center for the mental health response force.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what arrangements were made. It's always been my understanding that our regional dispatch center will dispatch the mental health response team. They have before COVID, during COVID, and will continue to do so. But I'm unaware of ongoing conversations about diverting any other calls. right now, but we certainly can look into that. And I think that is going to be probably part of more long-term, long-range expanded discussions on how we deliver services in that area.
I just want to make sure as we're paying the call center more that they're doing what we want them to do, which is this dispatch mental health. And I know you can't answer that on the spot, but it's something that's, and it's insequential to me voting for this budget, but it will be an important question for me next year. And just my last kind of observation, I think, thank you for the tidy budget. I think it's really great. The one in our metrics, which is something I pay particularly important to in the budget. It's something that I like to see because I think we measure what we treasure. There is one here on the school resource officers that kind of stood out to me a little bit, and this is something we might address in the next year. But you are suggesting almost a 1/3 reduction in time spent in school, which makes sense, COVID. But you're also suggesting that the officers are going to write 300 reports, which is only up from 169 or up from 469 when officers were spending 3 times the amount in school. And so I don't know if this was just aspirational numbers in here, or are we really anticipating writing that many reports with that few hours in the school? And that's on page 1010.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was just looking for here. So, I'll have to do a little research. I'm going to put Captain Wandel on the spot a little bit. The schools program is in his bureau, and see if he has some details that can speak to your question, Mayor.
Yeah, DC and Mayor, I think those are just projected numbers based upon historical quarterly objectives that we track. So I don't think 300 reports would be an accurate number for this past COVID year. I think it's just going to be what we're projecting for once we actually go back into school for fall of 21. And Michelle, does that sound right based upon your quarterly numbers? Yes, okay. So hopefully that answers the question, Mayor. It's just kind of yeah, the COVID year kind of really skewed things a little bit, but I think that's true, tried and true is ballpark of what 300 reports per year is what the SROs project.
Well, I sure hope that's not the case if we're spending 2/3 less time in the school, but we're like still reporting on virtually the same amount of students. So those numbers don't sit well with me, but there's nothing we could, it's not in the budget, but you guys are putting out there what you think you're going to do, which is spend less time in schools and write more reports. So this is a external facing document. So I just want us to think through some of these things in the future, because it looks like to me that officers are going to be spending all of their time writing reports, and that's not what we want them in there doing.
Mayor, if I could just speak to that very briefly. There are areas in our budget where we have to make projections, and we often have an internal conversation about like crime, for example. We project a certain amount of crime, but theoretically we'd like there to be no crime, or we may project complaints. But it's kind of a point. I always am the one who says our projected complaints for any fiscal year should be 0. That's really what we're striving for. But we know, like Captain Wandel said, based on historical data, it's a ballpark. But that doesn't change our desire to be proactive and preventative and reduce those numbers, as you suggest.
Well, I hope in next year's catch-up budget is not, in fact, 300.
No, and Mayor, if I may, those 300 reports are not all directly attributed to students. I will say for this past, COVID school year, I would say the majority of the reports taken were due to, let's say, vandalism on school property, or we did have some sex assaults involving students that did come to the school district. So it's a mixture of property crimes and also reports generated by the school district for the most part because of being COVID.
Thank you, Captain Wandel. Thank you, Deputy Chief. That's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Patrick, did you want to answer the 9/11 dispatch?
Yes, the figures for 9/11 dispatch are on page 1037. And actually, it's a very small increase compared to this year. For next year, it's only about $10,000 increase in cost That's less than 1% of a cost increase. Current year is about 1.455 million. Next year is 1.465 million.
Thank you, Mr. O'Clair. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the amount of projected reports, I got notification since my daughter goes to the school district, that they were going back full time. So this proposed 2021 year, that is with school full time through the fiscal year. So it would be all of the school year because our fiscal year would be June, right? So it would be September through June. So that would capture the entire year at full time.
That it? Captain Wandel?
Go ahead, DC. I think you're on track there.
Well, I was about ready to say that was my understanding, but it looked like you were shaking your head no. So I was going to defer to you.
I apologize. I was shaking my head. Yes.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Mitchell.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that made sense. And Mayor, I don't know, I mean, how, like, I don't know if you get those emails, but I know that it wasn't too long ago that I got the email, so it might have, been a missed point. But so if we're looking at that historically, it is down a little bit year over year, as far as, for that projection. So just wanted to point that out because I know that they'll be, at least right now, it's projected they're going to school full time, just regular schedule in the fall.
Well, it jumped out at me because according to the police budget, they're only spending 1,500 hours in the school compared to 5,500 or 3,500. So there's a discrepancy in the budget that brought it to my attention. So either we're spending less time or that number is wrong.
Well, when I looked at that, the 1,500 says it reflects reductions related to COVID when it has that small number one. So that, Jeff, you can let me know if I was wrong about that or whoever put that number one there. So I was thinking that maybe that just was a missed point.
Michelle, can you just speak to the footnote?
I was the one that entered that footnote, and I agree that the 1,500 maybe should be higher if they're in if the school year begins this fall through all of next year.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have a couple myself, but I want to make sure we get, looks like. Okay, I know that Portland's, we were previously sending DUI recovery over to a facility in Portland, I believe last fiscal year and prior, and that has since shut down. I didn't see any budget impacts for where DUI recovery is being taken right now. So that was kind of question number one. I can pause there if you guys have an answer. If there was any particular budget impacts.
There is a small one. We've entered into a countywide agreement regarding tow protocols. I'll need to look through the budget to find out exactly what that dollar amount is, but complementary to the fiscal impact is also an agreement. And I believe that agreement went in front of council and was approved during our current fiscal year.
Okay, that's good enough for me. Page 1002, could we get some clarification on, there were accidents listed. What I don't see, and this comes up at the neighborhood level, like 3 times in the last couple months, are accidents involving pedestrians and bicyclists with automobiles. That is a really hot topic in central Beaverton now, as you can imagine, with the increased pedestrian interactions downtown. It's a really good thing, but I think there's some concern there. So if we could get some clarification on that, just for the official document. And finally, to Councilor Sansusi's point, I know there's some state regulation on where we can put cameras and whatnot, but one of the things that consistently comes up at the neighborhood level too are residential streets and how certain areas are very high speed or treated as such by residents and drivers. And it is scary. I know I've personally dodged a lot of cars myself. And so I know there's limits on where we can put some automated cameras and things based on state law, but it would be really great if we could lobby to get that expanded. I think particularly in advance of especially Central Beaverton continuing to grow in density, continuing to grow in pedestrian influence, and in particular in some of our high safe routes to schools. We definitely don't want to react to this. We want to get in front of that and before we lose a pedestrian or God forbid lose a child. I think that would be just the worst thing ever. So if we could just really think about that from a budget standpoint and whatever we need to do. I consistently hear that. So thank you. Are there any? Oh, Mayor Beatty, you have one more. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I did have one more, and this has been similar to Councillor Fagan's reserve question. I have long thought that our training budget is too low for the department size that we have. With this year's recommendation of a 50% cut in travel training, is this going to be sufficient, Deputy Chief, for your department? One, you guys have requirements for licensure that you have to address for your entire force. And is this a safe, do you feel safe and should the council feel safe by cutting training to your department that this is the right choice when we know training prevents future injuries?
If I suspected that this was the amount we would have for the entire year, I would express some concern. But knowing that we have the council we have a supplemental process, we're also trying to put forth a responsible request in the context of there's still COVID impacts as far as where we can go, travel, and those sorts of things. I can tell you that we're going to expend what we're authorized appropriately to make sure that we have the things that we need and the training we need. And if we determine through the year that we need additional funds for very specific reasons, we'll be coming back to visit the council through the supplemental process and working with Mr. Auclair on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan.
One follow-up question. As we've been having more conversations about mental health and folks with mental health, I know y'all have been really making sure we're allocating some resources at the mental health level. Could you just talk for maybe a minute or two as to what some of that work looks like, what maybe your vision or the department's vision is and how we're better able to meet the needs of our community?
Yes, I sure can. Councillor Hassan, thank you for the question. It's a great opportunity to talk about something that we're very involved in. So there's a countywide initiative and effort to provide critical incident training, CIT training to all personnel, and our department is committed to attempting to do that. It's a very long term. This is in order to get all of our personnel that level of training, it's going to take a couple of years. And I hate to use COVID as an excuse, but frankly, it set us back a little bit. Notwithstanding that, we're also exploring the possibility of doing mental health first aid, which is basically an 8-hour class. Think of it in terms of kind of like a physical medical first aid, but for mental health types of issues. So we're definitely committed to that, and we've seen the benefits of our personnel having training in those areas. On a kind of a more, I guess, a softer, not as quantitative answer, we do in-service training regularly, and part of that training is scenario-based. And without getting to all the specifics, there are more and more scenarios where we build in some of the principles that people are getting trained on with regard to interacting with people in mental health crisis. So, those are kind of the three really big picture things, but directions we're going. And we're always looking for opportunities to provide our personnel with the best opportunities to achieve success when they're put in a situation and they have to respond to a call.
Any other questions or comments before we move forward? Seeing none, Mr. O'Clair, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we're coming up on 8:49. Do we want to continue? I did have the finance group, which is my department. It should be very short, but I just want to make sure that everybody's okay to continue on with this for tonight.
Yeah, we do it tonight or Thursday. So let's, you guys okay with powering through? Thumbs up. Yeah, let's power through.
Okay.
Thank you.
So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Susan. She's going to do an introduction of a couple of information on the finance department. And just for the record, we are starting on page 1079 of your budget document. Susan?
Good evening, Chair, Budget Committee, Mayor, and Council members. And so I just have a few slides on the finance department. So first, finance is not all numbers. We like to have a little bit of fun, especially around Halloween. And like all the other departments have said over the course of the Budget Committee meetings, finance did adapt to COVID. We had a little remote Halloween celebration as we had a remote Christmas caroling. Our own director played the guitar over Zoom and we tried to sing along over Zoom. We learned quickly that doesn't work very well over Zoom for everybody to sing at once. But some functions that we do in the finance department is, of course, we do the budget, which is why we're here tonight. You know, we put a lot of the numbers together and a lot of the narrative together in partnership with the departments. Our department does the central purchasing for the city. We have a small purchasing staff. We pay all the city bills, accounts payable. We also send out various billing invoices, accounts receivable, including utility billing. We manage the city's cash. So we have a robust cash and treasury management function here. And of course, we do our year-end audit, which results in our comprehensive annual financial plan or comprehensive annual financial report each year. So just very briefly, Patrick has the administration division within the finance department. There are no significant budget changes looking at fiscal year 21 in staffing or resources. Some major accomplishments over this last year include preparing for the new form of government and doing all the cost estimating that you've gone over, as well as maintaining operations and internal controls during this pandemic. In purchasing, our purchasing division, we have no significant budget changes in our purchasing division. Some major accomplishments for fiscal year 21, including implementing remote bid openings, which made that function very much more efficient, and also enhancing the city's equity program. And I believe the City Council does receive a report on how our equity and purchasing is going. And then in operations, that's basically everything else. Our accounting, our banking, cash investments. Again, no significant budget changes. One change that happened during this year is the central desk was actually brought in-house. For those of you who have been into the Beaverton building, you may recall that in the Beaverton building lobby is a desk to provide reception. We did outsource that to RLC Connections, which is the company that manages our third floor E-suites. However, because of the pandemic and other considerations, RLC Connections decided they did not want to be in that line of business any longer. And so they turned it back to the city, and the finance department stepped up to say, hey, you know, we'll do it. We have a fairly deep bench of staff with utility billing. So we rolled it into that function. Right now it's vacant because the building is still not open to the public. And so what we envision is staffing the central desk with a person to provide reception services, to collect utility billing payments and other payments that might come in, and to help out passports. It would be kind of light duty, if you will, with some of our utility billing functions. The more in-depth functions would remain on the second floor. And so we do have a vacancy, which we intend to recruit for in the middle of the summer in order to gear up possibly for a fall reopening. We really don't have a plan yet for that. For utility billing, we are in the middle of a major upgrade for our utility billing software. We're going to a subscription-based system from an on-premise. It's about a 20-year-old system that we're upgrading, so we're in the thick of that now, and we hope to go live in mid-August. We are also supporting the Purple Pipe system implementation. Once that gets up and running, we'll be adding a new line to those customers' bills once we have all that information. And of course, we continue our partnership with Community Action to provide financial assistance to members of our community that might need some help paying their utility bills. In terms of financial planning, we are building our long-term capacity for our long-term financial modeling. And we are showing that our water fund is remaining competitive with our neighbors, that being Tualatin Valley Water District and the city of Hillsborough. When you look at percent increases, we're right in line with those cities. So in fact, in some years, we've actually been a little bit better in terms of a lower percent increase. Tualatin Valley Water District has had double-digit rate increases, and ours hover around 5 to 6%. And that's because of all of these major capital improvements that we're doing. And we continue to partner with engineering to make sure that our capital improvement plan has a good slate of projects that they need to embark on, and that we can afford to do it either through our WIFIA loans or our state loans or system development charges, and then the revenue bond market. So that was just a very brief overview of what's happening in the finance department, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
What questions or comments do we have for the finance folks? Going once, going twice. We're going to let them off this easy. All righty. Back to you, Patrick. Thank you, Ms. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up is the municipal court, and I believe that Nathan Wolf, our court administrator, and Judge Juliet Britton are on deck.
All right, everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Nate.
Excellent, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Beatty, Interim Manager Wilson, City Councilors, Budget Chair and Committee, and Department Heads. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nathan Wolf. I'm the Court Administrator for Beaverton Municipal Court. And as Mr. O'Clair was saying, I'm joined tonight by Judge Juliet Britton, who is our presiding judge. I knew we were going last tonight, so I promised I would keep our presentation very short. Susan, if you wouldn't mind hitting the next slide, please, I would appreciate that. Let me start off by saying our main goals for this past year, we sort of shifted due to the pandemic and shifted to primarily ensuring that the general public and those who utilize our services continue to have access to justice. And to that end, we've remained open 5 days per week and essentially have no backlog at this point, which is very exciting for us. And then for this coming year, we look forward to reopening and reintegrating more in-person services while continuing to utilize this think outside the box approach that we've used over the past year in terms of updating our technology and policy updates. For a very brief overview of the court, what we do here is handle misdemeanor violation and parking cases that occur within the city of Beaverton, which averages approximately 40,000 violations per year and approximately 1,700 misdemeanors. And we thought it was interesting to note that approximately 85% of our criminal defendants are indigent. And in terms of access to justice, we are committed to ensuring that everybody that has a criminal proceeding has access to a qualified defense attorney, whether or not they can afford it. That is included in our budget. In terms of staffing, our staff includes approximately 25 people, which includes our 3 judges, our management leadership staff, and our court clerks. And Susan, if you would please hit the next slide for me. The budget that we have submitted is essentially designed to remain status quo with the exception of a request for increase in our specialty court programs. The purpose of our specialty court programs are to identify the root causes of defendants' criminal behavior and to put them in a program that incentivizes addressing those root causes. So the specialty court programs that we have, I'm sure that you're all well aware of our Be Sober program for our high-risk, high-need DUI multiple offenders. We are nationally recognized and that's going well. The program that has been our priority over the past year is the creation and implementation of this behavioral health court that we have recently launched and very excited to continue it. And we do have one other specialty docket that that was created in conjunction with the city attorney's office It is called Becker, which stands for the Beaverton Early Case Resolution Program, where we essentially are cases, low-level criminal cases are eligible to take pleas at the date of arraignment, the first court appearance, where we typically would not do that otherwise. This is beneficial for everybody because it saves a lot of time, saves resources in terms of attorney fees, and many of our defendants, frankly, don't want to come back to court if they don't have to. Over the past year, just to touch on a couple of things, since I am going fairly quickly through this, wanted to touch briefly on an equity component that over the past year, we've had a number of our court forms translated, primarily into Spanish, but working on translating them into other city priority languages. We created brochures that are on display in the front of the courthouse and have translated, it essentially is our contact information and how to access court services, translated into all city priority languages and available for people to take. We do have in-person interpreters available, as well as either over the phone or online via Passport to Languages or Language Line. And then in terms of access to court, we increased access via phone, via email, via Microsoft Teams, and we added a kiosk in the lobby. So for those people who do not have access to their own computer, their own cell phone, or other forms of technology, they can come in person and use ours. And then in terms of COVID response, we really tried hard to be accommodating to staff. We converted to a 4-10 schedule and added some remote days for staff. While many other courts across the state kind of shut down, we transitioned to a virtual court program via Microsoft Teams. So rather than, we are still doing court in person for our first appearances, but the remaining court appearances are all done virtually through Microsoft Teams and are handled remotely. We changed internal policies to allow cases to be handled either over the phone or online for our violation cases, where historically those were all required to be done in person only. We've made available forms online, added increased access to email, and set up voicemail for the court where there previously just never was. And then the voicemail it's on anytime we're closed, whether it's the night, the weekend, or in the event that somebody calls and it's very busy, they have the option to leave a message as well. And staff are typically returning emails and voicemails either same day or next day. So it's been a long and interesting year, but I feel like we are doing well, and I'm very excited to say that we have very little backlog, which is a big contrast to what a lot of the other local courts are doing. I do have Judge Britton with me. Judge, did you want to say anything about our behavioral health court program? I know that's kind of our new and exciting program.
It is, and we selected this picture so everyone here could meet Whitney Struess, our mental health liaison. She's in the middle there of that picture. She has done phenomenal work. I shared with council and the mayor the 1-year report, which highlighted the fact that she interacted and worked with almost 300 defendants in her first year in that role. And just as a reminder to the committee, the budget last year allowed for us to fund half of Whitney's position. So we're sharing, Washington County and the city are sharing 50-50 her salary. She's a master's level clinician. She is in the courtroom whenever we have new defendants arriving. She's helping the court assess and identify individuals who might need to connect with services, who are asking for services, and also as a resource to the attorneys and judges as the case moves forward. She's been an integral advisor as a member of our behavioral health court. So January, we rolled out a behavioral health court where we have a specialty docket for those that have been identified as having mental illness. These are high utilizers of our court system and our criminal justice system. So our goal is to supervise them in a different way than we traditionally have, with the hope that they will continue to get engaged in services and stabilize and move forward with their recovery. I also want to note, and it speaks to a little bit of what what was being discussed earlier. Whitney is a resource for Beaverton Police as well. So she's working with officers on cases that never become cases in our court. So she's not just a resource for the court, even though we call her a court liaison. So when the bike team, for example, comes across an individual who they think should be connected with services, they often are connecting Whitney with those people and we never see them. So there's a lot of great preventative work that's going on with this position. And then when a case does become a criminal matter, she's there also to support the defendants as we go forward. So we're thrilled with that position. We recently just found out that we'll probably be able to fund most of our behavioral health needs through some anticipated American Rescue Plan funds, thanks to the hard efforts of Mayor Beatty. And so hopefully we can then reimburse the city or cover the costs that we currently have budgeted in the general fund budget.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. That reminds me, I forgot to bring that up actually in talking about funding for our specialty court programs. First up, Be Sober, we do have the bulk of our program is grant funded through the BJA. We did receive a $500,000 grant over 4 years, so $125,000 per year. We spent less this year than we were anticipating, but it looks like we'll be able to roll some of that funding over. We do have 2 more years of BJA grant coverage. And then in terms of the behavioral health court, when we initially drafted the budget, it appeared that a lot of our asks were going to come from general fund money. We just found out recently over the past couple of weeks that it looks like we are eligible for this 2021 American Rescue Plan. And again, yes, a big giant thank you to Mayor Beatty for her assistance in this. And yeah, $744,000 over a 3-year period, which is phenomenal. So thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair.
I was going to say see if there are any questions or comments before we move forward.
Mr. Chair, I would like to point out that in the budget document on page 1187 and 1188, this is the new program that we're proposing for this budget year for the behavioral health court. It has a 0.25 FTE, which is actually transferred from our Be Sober program. So our Be Sober program used to have 2 FTE. We're taking a 0.25 case manager, Dewey court coordinator, and bringing it into this new program. And then we have about $87,000 worth of professional services to help kick off the program. And then with the $744,000 from the ARPA allocation for the next 3 years, we'll be able to really flesh out this program, make it very robust. That will come as a separate agenda item to the city council once we get all of the paperwork done, because I think this is an indirect allocation to the state's allocation of their ARPA funding to the state to us. And so we'll be bringing forward and there's probably going to be some sort of agreement of using this funding, and we'll bring forward a separate agenda of recognizing the revenue and then also additional expenditures to really make this program robust.
Thank you, Mr. O'Clair. Yep. Any other questions for Mr. Wolf or Judge Britton? Oh, looks like there are a few now. Sorry about that. Mr. Member Gallo, you're up.
Judge Britton and Mr. Nathan, I again, in full disclosure, I had a close family member who successfully enrolled in and completed the Be Sober program. So this, I always, every time I will see you guys, and if I see you in person, I want to thank you for being there and making that happen. So from right here, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Member Gallo. Counselor Hassan.
Yeah, similar comment. You know, I had the privilege to attend the Be Sober graduation a couple weeks ago, and it was a really humbling experience. And it was a reminder of the humanity that we have, because we tend to be really punitive about things. And we're seeing the importance of transformative and restorative justice, right? So someone does something wrong, and instead of just throwing them in the, wherever, right? We're like, what does this look like? What is a way that we can work with you and support you? And so just so much kudos. I think, Mr. Wolf, Nathan, I think I just really appreciated being invited and being able to participate. And I hope that as we evolve this city, that we continue to think about programs like this that allow us to get to the core of our community members' problems in a way that is not punitive, but more, hey, what can we do to help you? I don't want to give $20 to the person on the road. I will give $20 to the person on the road. You'll know me to do that. I am the person that does that. I'd like to give them more, and whatever that looks like. And the Be Sober program is doing that for people in our community. And I would like for us to continue to look at ways that we can do that so that I'm not handing $20 to people on the street. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Tivnon.
Yeah, thank you. I'm right there with you. I got to attend the Be Sober graduation as well as my second one, and it's really hard to talk about without tearing up. It's extremely moving to hear the stories of folks that felt absolutely lost, got in trouble, and instead of being looked down on by the court the way it's depicted in movies and in our consciousness, we're going to help you figure out why you got in that car and impaired, and digging into these root causes of why some poor choices were made. And I think one of the most inspiring parts is when the arresting officers get up there and they're looking in their camera like, hey, you remember me? And there's this moment of like smiling around that, which is not something you typically associate with a person who, took you out of your car, took your license away and hauled you off to jail. But there's this amazing amount of respect and pride on the part of the arresting officers to transmit to that person, I'm really proud of you. And I know that's gotta be something pretty heavy to be on the receiving end of that. So the work that you're doing in the Be Sober program, I can't tell you how many times I've talked about it with people all over the country. It's incredibly inspiring, and I think is at the heart of a lot of what we're trying to, these nuts we're trying to crack open of how do we truly solve for? How do we truly keep our community safe? So I'm a huge believer in the work you're doing, very supportive of it. I have one question for you, and that's in regards to going virtual with the hearings. It sounds like, there's probably some speed bumps along the way tech-wise, maybe with interpreters, making sure that communication didn't get lost in this medium. But I also imagine that it might have made some things quicker or easier for folks to show up and be held accountable and appear before the court. So can you talk about if there's any plans once we get out of the COVID age and back into whatever normal looks like? Are there plans to keep a virtual court going?
Certainly with jail arraignments, we're going to continue this because it allows for the individuals who need to be in special population units to not have to be transported within the jail to a room, which can be dangerous for the officers, can be dangerous for the individual, especially if they're experiencing mental health symptoms, or maybe they're detoxing. So with this technology, the officers can go to the cell with a mobile device and the person can remain in their cell. So we're absolutely going to continue that aspect. I mean, that's, if we look for silver linings in this COVID, that's one thing. It really pushed us to figure out a way, how can we improve safety when we're doing jail hearings? I can tell you that for traffic trials, the virtual hearings seem to be going pretty well for most defendants. I think that the average traffic defendant is a little more sophisticated, more resourced because they have funds to own a car. They often know how to use the device. I think on the criminal side of things, we have so many individuals that do not have their own device, that have no idea how to use the device, that we're likely going to have to primarily remain in person for those. But certainly, you know, we're open to, you know, if there's a demand for certain hearings or a certain type of hearing to be virtual, we can certainly explore it. We've been doing it for over a year now. So, you know, I think this pandemic really has opened our eyes as to kind of the possibilities and to really kind of adjust and evaluate. And so, you know, I look forward to kind of seeing what reopening looks like physically once the building is physically reopened.
Yeah.
But there is some room, I would say.
And Your Honor, if I can piggyback on that just a little bit, and thank you very much, Councilor Tivnon, for the question. We really did have to take a think outside the box approach to determine, you know, how are we going to keep access to justice available? How are we going to keep the courts operational? And some of the things, virtual court amongst them, but even some of the other things that we were doing previously, if you wanted to sign up for traffic school, you had to do it in person only. And now, you know, we can do it over the phone, we can do it through email, we can do it a number of different ways. And I think things like that, we are definitely considering keeping, because not only is it easier for us, but it's easier for the folks who are utilizing our services. It's really kind of a win-win for everybody. So the pandemic really, you know, forced us to pivot. But I think we learned quite a bit, and a handful of the things that we've implemented, we will be keeping.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Fagan, you're up.
Well, it's later here than there, but I just, and so I'll be very short, but Councilor Hassan and Councilor Tivnon really just nailed their response to this. I really like when we as a community invest in root cause work. So whether that's Future Connect or Be Sober or now the mental health court, we've been talking about a mental health court for years, and it's just really exciting to see it start to go. And I'm really looking forward to its future growth and the things we can learn about how to humanely work with members of our community that need help. And I look to the year, which hopefully isn't too far from now, where this is also something people are talking about around the country, about how Beaverton got it right and how we invested in taking care of our community instead of incarcerating them. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Sansucci.
Yeah, I'll also be brief. In addition to echoing the positive sentiments of my colleagues about the court, I want to also congratulate you on having what I'm going to call this year's absolute best narrative section of the budget. Reading that narrative in the budget gives a completely clear picture of what the court does and how it's doing it. And it wasn't always like that. We used to get a lot of great statistics, but not so much of the narrative. And you know, the one great thing about Beaverton's budgets is that we do include these narratives, and they tell people how the city actually gets its work done. And now the court is as clear as it has ever been. And so thank you for that. The other thing that I wanted to mention, besides the fact that you all have made the court actually function a whole lot better too, that's a really lovely thing. But it's actually a question for Mr. Auclair, and it's another one of those, could we have a memo, possibly, if possible, about the pros and cons of charging a convenience fee when people pay their court fines with a credit card? I think that's one of those questions that would be interesting for the council to mull over sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Member Gallo.
I just wanted to sort of somewhat respond or piggyback on top of what Councilor Tivnon said about the meetings and the people being happy and stuff like that. Councilor, again, it's one of the very few things that I've ever seen that has been turns a very profound and bitter personal defeat, the Be Sober program, into a very profound and very fulfilling personal victory. So that kind of puts it in perspective in my eyes. And I think I said I lived through it pretty close with a friend, so family member. So that's the way I would describe it. There's not that many things in life that turn defeats into victories, and this is one of them.
Member Gallo, I believe that concludes the questions and comments, unless there are others. Seeing none. Back to you, Mr. Leclerc.
Thank you, Chair. The next budget is the Information Systems Fund. It starts on page 1191. I don't have a presentation to share with you. Only that this last year under COVID-19, the ISD department has really pivoted to make the city become more mobile. Prior to COVID-19, there were probably about 40, 50 licenses of people that had the ability to network into the system. And now we have over 400. And it took a while to get that process done. And we're continuing to evolve and get into more what we call mobile technology via laptops versus the standard desktop. So they did a lot of work in getting us to be reactive. We will now have another challenge of the next issue of continual remote work in a different environment once we're open. The budget that you have presented to you tonight does have some increases, mainly around our technology and our mobile computing, and also upgrading our software. There's a section in the budget that talks about the new maintenance costs for new systems that we brought on board, mainly due to the mobile technology, and also for some of the costs of increasing our Microsoft presence on Office 365, and then bringing that into the organization. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just leave it to the committee if they wanted to ask me any questions specifically on the information systems budget.
Do not see any so far. I do have a question. Oh, I'll recognize Councillor Sansucci first.
Great, thank you very much. As a former software guy, I love this part of the budget. And my career aspiration, if I were to do my life all over again, might be to be a GIS software developer, but that's beside the point. It is a great budget, and I'm constantly amazed at how much work gets done in-house here in Beaverton by a relatively modest-sized team. Yeah, the number of application packages and systems that either get developed or get maintained and managed by this team is really pretty remarkable. The one question I wanted to ask relates to something I've been kind of poking my nose into a little bit over the last couple of years, and I know I've gone back and forth with Mr. Leclerc on this before. But I wonder if, the software packages that the city uses, there's a lot of them. Many of them are citywide packages, like the Microsoft Office one you referred to, the computers and the Windows subscriptions that we need in order to keep those operating, things like that. But there are quite a few packages that are department specific, like the Zen City that we heard about earlier before, and things of that sort. But the way things are accounted in the budget, the costs for those are not always allocated to the departments that purchase them and maintain them. I think particularly the maintenance costs for software packages are all gathered up here in the information systems budget. And I wonder if it might be better for us to find some way to distribute those costs out to those departments, so it's a little clearer to see what the continuing cost of maintaining some of those packages is for the departments that are using them when they're not citywide software things. It's not something that I'm going to suggest we change in this budget, but it just seems like something we may want to think about for future budgets. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair, if I could respond to that question, and if you might, especially from Mr. Sansucci, if you go to page 1229, that's where we have the maintenance contracts. And basically, in any type of software that is citywide, so it's the finance software, that is allocated to everybody, so all departments. But when you get into signs like the municipal court software, that $28,000 for e-court, that is directly charged back to the municipal court through an allocation process that's kind of behind the scenes. You don't really see it unless you're going to the municipal courts department and take a look at their transfers to ISD, and it would be notated in the narrative there. Again, continuing on, most of those items following that, the queues, pipe video inspection, the RTA fleet, the Marshals GIS, those all get charged directly back to the departments that use them. All of the police, WebLEDs, and the BPD ones are all charged back through an allocation process that, again, is behind the scenes. So we have the cost center here that pays for them, but then the budget charges the department for them.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that we need to be careful when we're reading the department budgets to look at the line item detail for the transfers to ISD to find those things.
Yes, a great place to look would be the storm drain fund, and take a look at the transfers to ISD. It'll tell you what the general allocation is and then specific allocations for some software items.
Great,
now,
thank you. Appreciate it.
There could be some additional ones that we can do on that to further allocate the cost, but yes, we do a chargeback.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Hassan.
Yeah, this is just a general comment as more of a new counselor coming in. I feel like one thing, just generally speaking, is our kind of innovation in technology and our access to technology. And so I'd like, not today, but in the future, for us to really be thinking about what ways we can use technology so we can work smarter, not harder, in some of our systems. I feel like here and there, I've seen some places where is there a software? Is there a solution? I know we're working towards that. I think getting that full-time city manager will help us get there. So I just wanted to call that comment because I do think just in what I've seen in my limited time, there's some opportunity in technology, really generally speaking. I also just want to add that as we're slowly going to be wrapping up the evening, I want to encourage our newer community members on budget committee to feel like they can speak up and ask questions. I realize that I feel like I've been speaking up a lot tonight and I haven't heard from some of you. So just putting it out there that you too are here to be a part of this and to ask questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Member Kamath.
So Patrick, I had a question going back to how we are changing the utility billing to a subscription-based model. So does that mean that we are going to a software as a service sort of model instead of capitalizing the software costs upfront and then maintaining it?
I think the subscription might have been a different word. I would have more used software as a service. So it is a cloud computing system. So instead of having on our current system, we have the servers in-house that run the software. Now it's going to be cloud computing. So we'll be remoting into the server on offsite to do all of our maintenance and our billing processes.
So we'll be paying them on a recurring basis. Is that correct?
Yes. We're paying them because we currently pay them on annual maintenance of the software system. So that there'll be a component for them now containing the software system in the cloud on the vendor side.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I did want to make one thought again with a great segue for Councilor Hassan. Technology is changing a lot. One thing that was interesting is in using our existing programming staff, all of our financial systems are all built in-house. And all of our, give you an example, our accounts payable system is all paperless. So we don't keep anything paper. It's all digital. The only thing that we send out this paper is the check to the vendor. And we're still trying to work on getting, those vendors that would like to have an ACH process with our bank. We could maybe create a file of all of the payments that could go out electronically versus a check paid. But anywhere from the only thing that does happen is that if the department receives a paper invoice, they'll scan it into a digital format and then attach it to the request for payment for processing.
Thank you, Mr. O'Clair. I don't see any more questions, but I do have one myself around, I did not see any line on cybersecurity, specifically investments. I think I had seen them in the past, but I didn't see them this year. So I didn't know if I just overlooked that for, with the cyber attacks and the ransomwares, that sort of thing.
Yes, so they are going to be on page 1231 listed there. We have things such as dual security, our net motion cloud, and let me find some other ones. The Varonis data management suite, the proof point spam virus checker. Just kind of going through some items. If you'd like, I could give you kind of a more comprehensive list of all of our cybersecurity type of software that helps us to manage activity.
Yeah, I didn't need that level of agreement. I just wanted to make sure we were still on keeping up our investments there, because every time I hear about the cyber attacks, I get really nervous for this work. I want to make sure.
Yeah.
So if you tell me we're good, then thank you. Any other questions, comments? I believe that's it, Mr. O'Clair.
So, Mr. Chair, if you want to adjourn the meeting till Thursday, May 27th.
We are so adjourned. We'll see you all Thursday. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.